In the rehabilitation department of District 3 in Susekdong, several people are working hard. Someone calls the protagonist, asking why he never answers the phone. Sweaty, the boy named Bak Yisu, responds that he didn't hear it because of the noise and asks if something happened. Smiling, his brother starts talking, questioning if something needs to happen for him to call his little brother, and says he just wanted to see his face since it's been a while. The boy then says he is busy, and his brother asks what is keeping him so busy. Next to him, a colleague tells other workers that they are doing it wrong and that it should be dumped like that. Showing several bodies, he explains that if they do it this way, they will float later. Changing the subject, his brother just asks if he's going or not. Before the boy can respond, someone appears falling to the ground. Annoyed, a man emerges out of nowhere, saying that these South Koreans are bastards. This is the North Korean Lee, from North Korea's Special Operations Squad and a spy. Responding to his brother, the protagonist explains that he will show up later. He asks the rookie how he's doing and injured. The rookie says he's fine since they didn't manage to advance much. At that moment, the boy starts taking off his jacket. As the leader of the Special Operations team against infiltrators from North Korea, he says they need to finish this now. Hearing the men mocking him, the bald man becomes extremely irritated. He charges at the hero, trying to strike his neck, but the hero manages to dodge. Quickly, he goes for a counterattack, landing an elbow under his chin like an uppercut. This hurt him and also made him angry. After the blow, he looks intently at his opponent. Looking up, he notices another blow coming. In an instant, the leader lands a downward right punch to the enemy's face, sending him straight to the ground. This punch was so strong that the man lay on the ground stunned. With a cold look, the boy picks up his jacket. Putting it on, he tells his subordinates to take care of the rookie and finish cleaning up the area. He informs them that he has an appointment, so he needs to go, and his subordinate responds, "Yes, sir." They place the guy in the wheelbarrow. They comment that this is why they can't go around telling people what kind of work they do. The only thing they can do about their job is pretend they are just doing manual labor. Later on, he is walking inside a building, approaching a man who asks him to wait a moment, saying he won't allow his entry today. However, the hero says he has a meeting with his brother, and the man apologizes and begins to explain. He says that the restaurant needs to maintain a standard of etiquette and suggests the boy come back later. In the background, someone calls out to him. Waving, his brother asks what he's still doing standing there, questioning if they weren't going to meet. Getting closer to the two, he asks the employee if there's any problem with his little brother. Stuttering and bowing, the man says there's no problem at all and that he didn't know the boy was the gentleman's guest. Walking away, Bake tells them to let it go and to go in already. At that moment, his brother notices what's written on the back of the jacket, saying that safety first is always a good thing. Elsewhere, someone yells, questioning how this happened. A man standing asks why he did this to them. Yelling, he says this is the first time in 3.5 months that they have meat for dinner. His colleague says that the boss asked them to wait because he will arrive soon, and a man beside him says it's okay since there's plenty of meat. Opening a bottle, the blonde man says he should have gone with the leader because he'd be eating rich people's food, and in the background, some black vans arrive. Parking, some people begin to get out of them. Saluting with a lot of food in his mouth, he welcomes the boss, and the blonde man comments that the rookie is fast, while the man in black asks the boss how he's doing. The manager apologizes, saying the project took too long, and that he asked them to wait because he has an announcement to make. But looking at the table, he notices someone missing, asking where Bak Yisu is, and the man with black hair says that the leader had to leave to take care of a personal matter. Reaching into his pocket, the man says that this way things will be a bit complicated. He fires a shot directly at the rookie, who falls back with full force. Soon, the manager announces that this special operations team has just been dissolved. Several armed men begin to arrive. They are all lined up and aiming at people, along with the manager, who is adjusting his pistol. He explains that this is a file purge, and everyone looks very frightened and surprised. Staring at them darkly, he explains that they all did a good job. Meanwhile, in a fancy restaurant, both brothers are eating together. Holding a card, the one with glasses invites his brother to work with him, showing a card where his name is listed as CEO and asking why a soldier like him is wearing a shirt with the phrase "Public Safety First." Seeing this, the boy asks if it's about becoming a public employee, and his brother asks if the military tells its soldiers to be public employees. Pouring wine into his glass, he says he has several good businesses and asks how someone could live comfortably with his brother living on minimum wage, saying it's nothing too difficult and that he'll only need to manage a few restaurants. He then asks if his younger brother is listening, and the latter responds that he will think about it. At that moment, his phone starts ringing. Taking it out of his pocket, he notices it's an unknown number. He tells his brother he needs to take the call, and the other asks if he's listening. A few seconds later, in the men's restroom, inside, the hero answers, saying he is Bak Yisu. It's his employee who asks if he's eaten plenty of rich people's food, and the leader asks Cheyenne what's happening with his voice. Sitting on the floor, he says that except for the leader who went to eat rich people's food, they all ate a lot and are feeling unwell. Speaking seriously, he asks his employee Lee Cheyenne to start explaining what actually happened, and he is lying on the floor, bleeding. He states that they are all out of the game, and the hero doesn't understand what he means by that, explaining that he had said this time things were indeed suspicious because that bastard manager Jang sold them out. In disbelief, Bake says this is impossible and tells him he's already on his way. However, his employee tells him to run because they will find him if he goes to the location. Unable to speak to his employee, he repeats his name in front of the mirror, irritated, but the call quickly drops. Suddenly, someone is approaching the restaurant, heading toward the main entrance. Smiling, the employee tells the man that he's sorry, explaining that they're already full and that it will be hard to accommodate another guest, but the man quickly strikes with a knife, holding the blade with a firm grip. That single blow was enough to hit a vital spot of the employee. Already inside the restaurant, the older brother is almost falling asleep at the table, and he soon notices someone approaching, lifting his head, asking if it's his brother who has returned. However, he is startled to see three masked men wearing vests and holding knives in front of him. Their eyes carry a murderous aura as the man sees his reflection in the blade. Meanwhile, the protagonist is running after receiving that call, but he notices something that catches his attention along the way. Running, he sees a group of masked men and immediately wonders if his brother is okay. One of them notices that he's in front of them, it's Bak Yisu, and he tells the group that they must eliminate him. The same man charges at the hero. Quickly, the protagonist manages to dodge. Looking for a counterattack, he lands a punch straight on the man's face, then grabs his knife, striking the masked man again, but this time with a fatal blow. His companion sees this but doesn't give up. He also charges, but Bake manages to dodge and goes toward his opponent, grabbing his leg while holding the knife. With just physical strength, he slams the man to the ground. Lying on the ground, he starts to observe the hero, who is looking at him seriously, holding the knife of his deceased companion. With a murderous aura, Bake finishes him off brutally. All the others watch their target getting up after the fight, who tells them that the knife's trajectory was very straight. Taking off his jacket, it seems that things have gotten serious this time. Staring at them with a sharp, murderous look, he points the bloodied knife, asking for the next one to step forward. In response, three men charge at once. They all duel with their knives, but the protagonist emerges victorious, striking one of the masked men with a precise knife blow. However, there are still two left who charge at him. Yisu ends up taking a cut on his left shoulder. Behind him, another man appears with a knife, but the hero notices. Meanwhile, elsewhere, one of the men approaches the boss and informs him that the job is done. The boss then asks about Bak Yisu, and his subordinate, checking the time, reports that a new squad has been formed, is in operation, and that the report will be out soon. Holding the cigarette between his fingers, the old man says that one squad won't be enough for this. Back at the restaurant, the protagonist is holding his knife. He has defeated the entire squad, and already anticipating this, the boss orders his subordinate to assemble another squad. He orders them to kill everyone, leaving no witnesses. Exhausted, the boy calls for his brother. He left his glasses on the blood-stained table. His brother is perplexed and says that this is the last question. Deeply irritated and holding a knife to the neck of one of the masked men, he asks where his family is on this beautiful day. He asks if they're all waiting for the man to come home from work. Without a second thought, he finishes the man off right there. He tells him not to die so quickly. Suddenly, the man's radio starts buzzing with someone calling. The brother wonders what this is about, and on the other end of the line, someone talks about eliminating Bak. Pulling something from his coat, he questions if the masked man still uses these things. As he cleans himself, he hears someone on the device again mentioning the need to eliminate Bak Yisu immediately. Hearing everything, the man continues to clean himself. Once again, someone talks about immediately eliminating Bak Yisu. Holding his cloth with a murderous aura, he angrily questions who they are trying to eliminate. This is the protagonist's brother named Bak Doayan, the head of the Taishan organization and CDO of the TS Financial Group. Quickly, the protagonist looks at the man lying on the ground. Looking to the side, he hears a noise. Running to the location, he finds his brother injured. He is holding his head, calling his younger brother by name. Fixing his hair and standing up, he asks if those guys were his guests. Sometime later, the CDO is in the backseat of his car, still holding his head. He is with his brother and wanting to understand what's happening. He starts to think about which organization the boy belonged to. Listening to the conversation, the driver glances at the rearview mirror. Confused, Do-young tries to recall the name. Replying, the driver says it's called Haidi and that if he doesn't remember, he can call it the Intelligence Squad. Taking out his hair tie, he recalls that it is indeed called the Intelligence Squad. Tying his hair, he asks if he is just a common soldier or from the Intelligence Squad that just went to North Korea to kill some people. Responding, Beck comments that his brother isn't just a gangster, but also the head of the Taishan organization. The man thinks it's crazy how twins can be so different. Changing the subject, the protagonist asks to be dropped off here, which surprises his older brother. Explaining, the hero says that if he stays with him, he might be endangered just like it happened this time with those masked guys. He says that they will hunt him until they manage to kill him. Pointing to the side, the brother says he is really scared and that he'll drop him off there, but then changes his mind, saying he'll take him to the police station to help locate him. Annoyed, the hero says this is no joke, but his brother says they've arrived and asks him to get out of the car. The elder promptly gets out. Behind him, Bake says he knows what he's trying to do. Stopping in his tracks, the man calls for his brother. These are memories of friends and family. It looks like it's a funeral. Several men in black suits are gathered close to each other. Smiling with his hand on his waist, he asks his brother if he wants to play a prank. A woman asks the director if he is doing well, and he says he is doing very well. This woman says they are preparing everything exactly as he requested. She explains that everything will be finished in about 2 hours, and with that, the man calls for his younger brother. With a somewhat sad look, he says that if he dies, all of this will end. Upon hearing this, the boy tenses up. Showing a picture of his little brother, the man says that the only way is for them to kill him. His picture is framed as if he were really dead. He says that all of this will be something similar to a performance. In front of his fake grave, he says he learned this from the Yakuza, and that they use this tactic when they need to erase a member's identity or start a new one. Curious, the hero asks if they think those guys will fall for it, and the man responds that they will indeed fall for it. However, the most important thing of all is still missing. Tishin is an organization that became more famous than he imagined. People start arriving at his funeral. His little brother ended up dying in the end. Many people begin to kneel. No, rather, the younger brother of Chief Bak Do-young ended up dying. Thus, all the wealthy businessmen came to see him at his funeral, becoming his witnesses. After the explanation, he asks if he has any questions. Responding, he says he has none. If he believed it, the boy will believe it too. A van arrives at the location. It is the only one in that particular place. Seeing this, one of the men asks what kind of rich person uses a van and wonders if it's one of those who only came to the funeral to eat something. Inside the vehicle, the boss reviews some papers and realizes that this is the twin brother. He says the car won't stop moving. With a sadistic look, he asks if he's just a common gangster. Suddenly, someone knocks on the window. Saying it's so dark he can't see, calling the old man uncle. He states that he can't just enter the place. Looking back, he tells his group that this is their last mission before they enter the field. He explains that they need to open the coffin and find out if Bakisu is really dead, as they say. Wearing a cap, one of the men steps out of the van. The man with black hair asks what this is and why he looks like a beggar. He then asks if he was at the academy. Touching the brim of his cap, he orders him to respond and even calls him an idiot. He tells him to go back to the car, but before he can finish the sentence, the man with the cap lands a quick punch, showing no reaction whatsoever. Even with just one punch, the man falls to the ground with full force. This catches the others' attention. They rush at the mysterious man, shouting insults. However, others join the fight as well. The battle begins. One of them lands a blow on the neck. Another comes from behind, putting the bald man in a headlock. He is already beginning to lose his breath. In just a few seconds, they manage to defeat them all. This is the Special Operations Team of High-D, the second squad of North Korean assassins called Hala. The group looks up the top of the staircase, seeing two people alone. Unbuttoning his jacket, the man begins to prepare. Descending the stairs, he takes off his coat. After descending, he stands facing the group. Next to one of them, the muscular man says this is a funeral ceremony meant only for the family. The man with the cap looks with a murderous aura. Quickly, he lands an uppercut on the man's face, but it has no effect at all. Soon the man asks if he could leave. This man is the head of security for the TS Financial Group in Taishan, named Hajinwo, known as the Muscle Giant. With rage, he raises his hand to the invader's face, making him tremble with fear, while his colleagues simply watch the situation. The man falls to his knees and begins to adjust his shirt, grabbing the invader by the mouth, making him completely lose his breath in panic. He drops him to the ground a few seconds later. Nervous after seeing this, one of the invaders realizes that the guy broke his colleague's jaw with just one hand. Charging at him, he yells that he's a bastard and that they can't just stand still, they need to attack. The muscular man dodges the blows, grabbing another by the mouth, preparing to attack while one of them calls him a bastard again, landing a solid punch on his face. After taking a punch, the man, now bruised, simply stares at him. This same invader starts throwing a series of punches to the torso, telling him to keep fighting and calling him an arrogant bastard. Even after taking several blows, the muscular man prepares for a counterattack, landing a downward punch, completely defeating this invader, sending him crashing to the ground with force. Reflexively, he grabs another by the mouth as well. However, the invader tries to break free, lifting his feet off the ground. He attempts to escape before he loses his breath, wrapping his legs around the muscular man's body, who shows no reaction. He then grabs the bald man by the neck, pulling the man up. With a murderous aura seeking vengeance, he stares down the invader while holding him with a single arm. Regaining consciousness, one of them is on the ground. He soon notices his shadow approaching. He throws one of the invaders onto his colleague who was on the ground, and they collide violently. Both are left lying down bleeding. A single man defeated all of them without the slightest difficulty. Inside the van, the boss observes everything. Trembling, he becomes deeply irritated with this frustrating outcome. Taking off his glasses, he curses and says he'll have to open the coffin himself because no one does anything right. He then exits his van. Walking towards the man while adjusting his jacket, he apologizes to him for all this. As he approaches, he says that it seems they have a misunderstanding here. Handing over a card that shows he is a lieutenant colonel in the army named Jang Sungho, he says he's not that kind of person. He explains that he is the lieutenant of the deceased Yisu, and that their meeting here was a big misunderstanding, and that he came to pay his respects. Staring down at him, the man says nothing. Suddenly, he looks up the top of the staircase. He sees the protagonist, who in theory should be dead. Letting him pass, he tells the man he may enter, and the man thanks him. He then takes some incense inside the place. Looking at the photo of Baek Yin-soo, who supposedly passed away, lighting the incense, he wonders if he is really dead. Kneeling, he thinks that the one before him is Baek Do-young. He wonders, then, how much he knows. At another moment outside, squatting down, Do-young says all of this is because of a betrayal and asks if everything happened because of this Lieutenant Jang. He asks what they should do and if his little brother wants him to kill him. However, Yin-soo says he doesn't think there's a need for that kind of thing. Soon, his older brother asks if he wants him to offer him food and send him home. With a vacant look, he says no. Back in the present, he thinks that he will find him himself. Holding a knife, he calls out for Lieutenant Jang. Turning his head, the man responds to the call. The boy then asks if he has a minute so they can talk. Standing, holding the knife, he stares at him with deep hatred. In his mind, the protagonist thinks he will confront the lieutenant pretending to be his brother. He questions if the man knows what this is. Jang, afraid, starts staring at the knife in silence. Baek says he found one just like this on his little brother's body and that he needs to explain properly, and if he doesn't like what he hears, it will go into his body. In front of the lieutenant, he asks who killed his little brother after all. In his mind, he realizes the boy really did die. He asks them to stay calm and says that his brother died during an accident on a mission for the national good. However, he thinks that it looks like he'll only need to get rid of this gangster. Continuing, he says he can't go into details as it's a confidential operation, but that, in any case, he will conduct a thorough investigation. Before he can finish speaking, the hero punches the liar in the face. He screams in pain and blood pours from his nose. Annoyed, Baek says the man talks a lot of nonsense while he lies on the ground, stunned. Again, he asks who killed his brother. However, the man remains silent. Quickly, a woman steps in front of the boy, stopping him. A muscular man approaches his boss and says he thinks it's better for him to withdraw. Furious, he tells him to come back and calls him a bastard. Leaving the area, the man just looks back. Sometime later, his older brother mimics the boy's words. He asks if it sounded similar, and the woman tells him to keep his arm like that and tilt his shoulder more. Seeing all this, Baek asks what they are doing. Sitting on the couch, the man says the performance was good and asks if intelligence agents learn this in infiltration and camouflage cases. Responding, the protagonist says he bought some time, but that he will surely return. So his brother says he'll give the address for a visit. He recalls inviting him to join the organization, and that he will be welcomed with open arms. Carrying his backpack, he says he can't hide in this place forever, and his brother asks where he's going. The boy replies that he's going to the funeral home and that it won't be an act. Looking back with a somber look, he explains that it won't be an act because he really will die. Confused, he asks if he's leaving him here and if the boy will actually fight. Approaching, he says he understands what's happening but asks why he doesn't stay in this place since he's alive. Explaining that he could work with his brother, but Yin-soo asks if he wants him to live in this place as a gangster. After hearing this, his brother just observes. He then confirms that's exactly what it is. After all, he kills people and does dirty work, just like him. Yin-soo slaps his brother's hand off his shoulder. He starts walking away while his older brother calls his name. Placing a hand on his face, he says it doesn't feel like having a twin brother. He's more like a stubborn mule. He then tells his subordinate Jin Woong to gather some men and go with him because his little brother is about to do something stupid. At the same time, elsewhere, the protagonist is on the street at night. Suddenly, he notices something. One of the subordinates is approaching. Adjusting his hood, he asks if they are still following him. The man responds that they are. He says that these are orders from the director. Near them, hidden with a knife, someone is observing the whole situation. Elsewhere, Jang is on the phone, telling someone to keep an eye on it. Ending the call, he starts thinking about that expression. The expression of someone who was absolutely certain they were going to kill him. Baek Do-young must certainly know something about all of this. Suddenly, someone tells him not to look back. Placing a hand on his shoulder, the person explains that if he wants his daughter back safe and sound, hearing this, he asks what the person wants. Trembling, he says he will give them anything they want. The person brings their arm close to the man's neck, frightening him, but soon reveals it's his daughter, making him very happy. He asks how the trip was, and she replies that it was horrible because the seat was uncomfortable and hard, so her father apologizes and says that next time, he will choose a better spot. Hugging the old man, she says it's okay because the worst part was missing her father, so the man says that next time he will buy a plane ticket for a quicker trip. Excited, she says her father has the power of an intelligence agent, and laughing, Jang says her father is just a bureaucrat with an office job. Curious, she asks if he doesn't know how to fight. Laughing with his eyes closed, he responds, who knows, and says he's never tried to find out. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Do-young tells the woman to open the doors because he needs to buy a cigarette, and she says she'll ask someone downstairs and that he should stay in this place. Frustrated, he says he just needs a bit of fresh air because he's completely confined here. She says no because Chief Ha and the others are with his brother, so it will be dangerous if he leaves now. He then asks if he can't go out without a guardian, and she says not exactly a guardian, but that he can't go out alone. Smiling, he suggests they do it another way. Someone starts coming down from the 57th floor. Holding hands, they both wait with 2 security guards. Confident, he asks Numet if she wants to go with him to buy a cigarette, and embarrassed and stuttering, she says she will. Looking back, he tells one of the staff that this is his Numet and asks him to say hello, embarrassing her even more. Suddenly, he changes his expression. Placing a hand on her shoulder, he asks if he doesn't think his Numet is very beautiful, and the bald man responds that she is indeed very beautiful. Continuing, he explains that everyone should call Miss Suwa Nuna. With a murderous aura and a sharp look, he questions who he is and asks if Lieutenant Jang sent him. The man responds, starting to say he doesn't know what he's talking about. However, before he can continue, he tries to stab him, but Do-young manages to dodge. After dodging, he becomes serious. Holding the knife, he asks if the man also has one and if he brought more weapons. The woman then responds that yes, they are inside her skirt. Nervous, the man starts to reach for the knife on the woman's leg. Quickly, the bald man moves to attack, trying to land a frontal knife strike, which is dodged. Very swiftly, the man manages to evade. Noticing something, he looks closely. He comments that the bald man is well dressed. Instantly, the imposter tries another strike, and he manages to dodge again. In his mind, he thinks that this blade is tricky and too short to cut through his opponent's bulletproof vest. Deciding to switch to hand-to-hand combat, he shoulder checks him. Looking back, he notices the other imposter trying to strike Swa. Standing, the man is ready to finish off the woman lying on the ground. However, he ends up hitting the CEO's shoulder. Relatively calm, he asks Swa if she's okay and comments that it's been a while since he was stabbed. He thinks this guy is a bastard for attacking Swa so deliberately. He concludes that things are getting quite dangerous for her. Without hesitation, he cuts the man's arm, disarming him. Surprisingly, the bald man arrives to help his colleague. The CEO intervenes and they begin to fight. In the background, in great pain, the black-haired imposter just watches. On his knees, he reaches for his fallen knife. Swa appears and kicks the knife away. Determined, she lands a knife blow to the man's neck. At the same time, Do-young manages to disarm the bald man, who looks surprised. He brings his knife close to the man's face, fully determined to do it. Looking down with the terrifying and maniacal aura, he says he will welcome him with open arms while the man stammers in fear, begging for mercy. However, this doesn't change the boss's decision, and he finishes him off. A while later, someone arrives by elevator. It's the CEO and the girl, and the man asks if they don't know how to do their job right since they let these things get into the elevator. Concerned, one of them comments about their boss's shoulder. Changing the subject, he asks for a cigarette because it's really hard to find something to smoke around here. His subordinate pretends to reach for a cigarette, but instead pulls out a knife, stabbing him. Seeing this, the woman is in shock. Reflexively, the boss grabs his subordinate by the mouth. Speaking in Korean, he shows he's very annoyed by all of this. He starts pulling at the subordinate's face, revealing his true face while he tells his boss not to overdo it. Quickly, the opponent dodges and moves away, pulling a dagger from somewhere. With his mask melting, he smiles and prepares to attack. Do-young comments that he'll borrow a knife instead of a cigarette, and in the background, his subordinate says he'll handle it. However, the boss tells him to give it to him as soon as he asks because he will deal with this bastard himself. Obeying the order, he hands a knife to the boss. In the background, the girl yells for the president, who tells her not to open the door for strangers. Inside the elevator, they wait to reach the desired floor. Holding 2 knives, he says that now the numbers are even and asks if he has anything else to say. Smiling, Ghost asks if the president always talks this much. He is part of the assassination team of the HID Special Task Force, his true identity unknown, but his codename is Ghost. Surprised, the man asks how he knows his name and if he also killed his brother. In his mind, he thinks the wounds are too deep, so he needs to end this quickly. Smiling, Ghost says he'd love to if he had the chance. Then he charges. Trying to strike him, he asks if Bak Yisu is really dead, and the boss says the lieutenant paid a small sum for condolences and left. Continuing the fight, the white-haired man says he's changing his question. Very close, he asks where Bak Yisu is, and the man asks if he's deaf. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, someone is walking down the sidewalk. Bake, along with his subordinate, enters an alley. Following them, the man turns to enter as well. However, a fist comes toward his face, landing squarely, sending the follower flying away. But he manages to defend himself. Surprised by this incredible strength, he wonders if his arm is broken. Walking toward the man, the protagonist asks if Lieutenant Jang sent him. Scratching his head, he asks if it was to check if he was dead or not. Trembling, the man responds that yes, as expected, there was no way Bak Yisu could die so easily. Nervously, the boy recognizes this voice. Looking, he realizes it's Lee Cyan, and taking off his hood, Lee says it's been a while. Joining them, the subordinate asks if they know each other, and the blonde man yells that yes, asking what the gorilla man is going to do about his injury. But the hero ends up apologizing. Placing a hand on his shoulder, he says he should have been with him. Bowing, he says he was the only one who survived. Starting to speak, a blonde man makes it clear that both of them survived actually. Smiling, he says that next time he eats something delicious, he should take him along too. Suddenly, he begins to feel a lot of pain, saying he needs to take care of it, and Yisu asks where he's hurt. He responds saying he already had a hole in his stomach and that he just broke his arm. Observing the man, he comments that he is not a gorilla. However, he asks why his expression turned like that. The man seems perplexed and stressed on the phone. Lee asks if the hero knows what happened. At the same time, elsewhere, Do-young takes a blow to the chest, barely managing to dodge as it would have been an even deeper cut. Fighting face to face, they both stare at each other. The boss tries to strike his head, but Ghost manages to dodge again. He is furious, engaged in a very intense fight. Excited, he questions if Ghost will really keep dodging like that and tells him to come here. However, in his mind, he realizes there's no good reason to drag this fight out for too long because his vision is already getting blurry. Do-young sees everything blurred while Ghost says he is indeed Bak Yin-su's older brother. He tries to strike his neck again, but he manages to dodge. A line appears in the fight. Holding the string tied to his arm, Ghost admits. Holding the string, he says that for a gangster, he's actually quite good. As he finishes the sentence, he makes a vertical cut on Bak's torso, causing his knife to fall to the ground. He steps back and Ghost asks again where his brother Bak Yisu is. With the knife in his hair, he questions the man if he still doesn't get it. The man asks what he's doing. Bak ends up cutting his own hair, asking if he needs to do this for him to finally understand, revealing that he is Bak Yisu and not his older brother. Seeing this, the man is surprised and nervous. Stuttering, he says there's no way this can be real, and excited, Yisu comments that he really is a clueless guy, charging in to continue the fight. Also excited, Ghost says that Bak Yisu can't be that clumsy. He goes for a frontal attack with his dagger. Hitting the man directly, the hero says that he's been annoying since the beginning. Using his right hand, he makes a cut across the white-haired man's face. Falling to the ground, Ghost is desperate and bleeding heavily. In the background, Yisu orders him to get up right now, asserting that they must continue. Still on the ground, the man can't believe it. Standing, he calls Yisu an ignorant thug, trying to strike him with the dagger, but the hero manages to grab his wrist, landing another cut, this time on the abdomen. All battered and full of rage, he says it can't be possible. Looking directly at his opponent's knife, he thinks that this really is Bak Yisu. He points his knife and says he wants to fight again. Gathering the courage to fight once more, he tells him to die. While they fight, he still questions how this could have happened. Once again, Yisu manages to grab the man by the wrist, suddenly grabbing his dagger, plunging it into Ghost's torso while repeating for him to come again. With his right hand, he makes another cut, causing the man to collapse to the ground, completely shattered. In a panic, Ghost realizes that this really is him. With a terrifying aura, Bake says he wants more. Looking apathetic and carrying intense hatred in his eyes. Stammering in fear, Ghost tells him not to come any closer. Holding the knife, he says he is Bak Yisu and that it's just him and his brother. Seeing the knife above his head, the man begins to panic. Yisu misses his opponent's head, but the man manages to stab him in the shoulder. Seeing this scene, the man is very surprised and frightened. He notices Bak's wound. Looking at him, he realizes he is standing over his unconscious body and calls his name. Standing, he notices someone approaching. It's the real Yisu who gets out of the car, worried about his brother. Running to the scene, he finds him lying on the ground. Holding him in his arms, he pleads, shouting for his brother who is injured or perhaps even dead. Crawling up the stairs, the man feels intense pain, repeating Bak Yisu's name multiple times while flipping through his book. Grinning maniacally, he says he killed Bak as he marks an X with his own blood. While Yisu cries desperately for his brother, the man continues saying he killed Bak Yisu. Back at the apartment, Suwa says she can't do this anymore. She says it's not just the General Assembly, but also other local organizations that are noticing the absence of President Bak Do-yeon. She continues, stating that they need to appoint a new representative and that Chief Jinmo himself could do it. Standing up, he says that Taishin without Do-yeon in charge is not Taishin. Irritated, the woman says he's only going to watch the organization sink this way. She insists that if President Bake ended up like this, he should maintain balance and preserve Taishin. The man tells her to stop. Crying, he asks if she really doesn't know this and asserts that this person doesn't exist. He says there's no one who can replace Bak Do-hyung and Taishin. Meanwhile, Yisu is walking, and in the background, Lee calls out to him, asking him to wait a moment. Getting in front of him, he asks where he's going. Looking down, he says that the wounds on his brother's body were from the skills of a man who had been trained. He asserts that he is certain it was a special hire made by Chief Jang. There are many cases where Jang's special contractor is disguised just like them. If they find him, they will also be able to find Chief Jang in the process. Placing a hand on his shoulder, he asks what they should do now, and Yisu responds that Chief Jang is the one who killed his brother. Crying, he says that just as they did to him, the two of them will find and kill them. Sometime later in the Pangyo Techno Valley, peeling a fruit, someone says they hate Pangyo. He comments that there isn't much to eat around here. This is Kim Tae-won, the CEO of T1 ICT. Standing up, he says that they only have rich people around here, so money is useless. Walking with several subordinates, he says the men should enjoy the big waters of Seoul. Additionally, they are also part of the General Assembly of the 4 largest organizations in the capital of South Korea. Leaning against the fence, he begins to speak. Looking at a man tied up, he says he heard the manager said something sweet. Tied up, the man yells, asking what he's talking about. Cutting one of the ropes, he asks if he shouldn't release him since he's not cooperating. At this, the man panics. He reveals that Taishin was attacked and that his friend and Sewell said they are clashing with an unknown force and Taishin hasn't done anything about it yet. Moreover, Chief Bak Do-hyung still hasn't appeared. Hearing this, the man is surprised. With a sadistic grin, he cuts another rope and asks if he's sure Do-hyung has really disappeared. Sweating profusely and scared, the man says he's certain, and that's why they won't even attend the General Assembly that's coming up. After hearing this, the CEO asks if there's anything else to say. Responding, the blonde man says that's all he heard. Commenting that everything is fine, Kim decides to cut the last rope, causing the man to fall. Holding the fruit, he tells his subordinate to call everyone together. Eating, he says they're going to devour Taishin today. The tied-up man falls to the lower floor and apparently is relatively fine. Meanwhile, at the Myeongdong livestock market, Yisu walks alone through it, saying it was dark under the lamp. If you hide him where you want to find him, anyone might end up finding him, so you need to hide where even you can't find. This is Chief Jang's way of thinking. The protagonist opens a door somewhere. He thinks that these guys were also trained by Chief Jang somehow. That is, if he's not careful, he will get caught. Holding some weapon, he opens the door. Peeking through the crack, he's surprised by something. Entering, he encounters a massacre, and a man notices that it's Bak Yisu who arrived as colleague and asks if he's alive. Covered in blood, the bald man tells him to put that aside because even if he doesn't kill him, he's going to die soon. Approaching, Bake asks how this happened, and the bald man starts to respond, saying that Jang is a bastard. He explains that he gathered everyone there. He asks him to do a favor for everyone, saying he heard it over the radio. All the other shops were vacated. It's probably the same thing in all other places. With his hand on the hero's shoulder, the bald man starts calling him by name, but Bake tells him to stop talking. Deeply irritated, the bald man says that Jang has become too powerful for him, and that it's not an organization he can handle alone. He then tells him he must survive. Falling into his arms, he tells him to run. Starting to get angry as well, the hero thinks about the organization. Meanwhile, in a building, a man states he is very disappointed and that, as far as he knows, the 4 major organizations are called the General Assembly. Looking to the side, he questions if Taishin was just this much after all. Shinwon appears, holding 2 men by their collars. With a sharp look, he says they are the 4th. Throwing one of them to the ground, he comments that he doesn't know where or what the man heard, but he says they are the 4th group of gangsters attacking just this week. Smiling with his hand in his pocket, the man questions the gangsters. He says he was trying to be polite and that he would take it easy on the man. At this moment, he pulls a knife from his suit. Surrounded by his subordinates, also armed, he asks if he should fight like a gangster. Sighing, Jinwon says he's getting quite tired now. Annoyed, he tells them to come at him with everything. Behind them all, Bake appears, telling them to move aside. He walks up to the muscular man, and everyone in the background questions if he's lost his mind and if he's also from Taishin. Staring at him, Jinwon asks what he can do for him. Bak says he needs an organization to avenge his brother and that it would be impossible to do it alone. With hatred in his eyes, he asks him to give him Taishin. Confused, Jinwon repeats the question and the gangster appears, asking what he is doing. Threatening with a knife, he asks if he doesn't see that everyone is busy. In an instant, the boy lands a punch with the back of his fist, while the man tells him to follow orders. Holding his bleeding nose, the man becomes irritated. Analyzing carefully, he wonders if this is Bak Do-hyung as they look identical. He then questions his employees who said Bak Do-hyung was not present, and everyone is surprised. Asking if Bak Do-hyung has returned, Jin watches everything in silence. Pushing one of his men, the boss asks what they are doing and says there are only 2 of them anyway, so they should take them down now. Following the order, they charge at the protagonist with their knives. Quickly, the hero strikes one of them with a fatal blow, fighting against 2 at once, while the leader realizes he's in trouble. Frustrated, he looks at other subordinates and orders them to attack all at once. He declares that Taishin ends today as his men join in the attack. Yinsu demonstrates a deep sense of hatred combined with an extraordinary level of concentration. Without hesitation, he charges at the 3 men and strikes one of them. Angry, the purple-haired leader calls them idiots and asks for a knife, while the protagonist strikes another employee with a fatal blow. Appearing behind him, the leader calls the boy by his brother's name, asking if he thinks knives won't work against his body. In a second, the boy counters using his knife in his right hand, disarming the man instantly. The knife falls far away. Stammering and looking to the side, the now injured man just repeats the name Bak Do-hyung, realizing that this Taishin is not something to be taken lightly. He then looks at the protagonist and senses his terrifying aura, knowing he's about to be finished in seconds. Terrified, he declares that they will all retreat and orders his men to return to Pangyo. Taishin's subordinates recognize the boy as President Bak Do-hyung. Jin thinks to himself that Taishin can no longer exist without Bak Do-hyung after all. And that was what he ended up thinking, but he knows it's not right. The men say that the president is here to help them, Walking up to the boy, Jin asks if he wants Taishan. He comments that if that's what he wants, there's only one way to make it happen. Elsewhere, 4 people are sitting at a table, and one of them comments that it's already been a month. A bit tense, he says that Baek Do-hyung still hasn't appeared. Another says that the idea of the General Assembly is ridiculous, and that he suggested getting rid of the gangsters because of it. Holding a pair of glasses and crossing her legs, Awon comments that she heard an interesting rumor about Baek Do-hyun being dead. Picking up a glass, another man says that if this is true, then Taishan is truly finished. Taishan is Baek Do-hyung's organization. Someone starts arriving at the location, recalling Jin's words about there being only one way to take Taishan for oneself. He enters the room accompanied by 2 people. He questions if they were all that worried about him. Appearing with Jin and Lee, says he should have bought a souvenir, it seems. Jin reveals that the only way for Baek Yisu to take Taishan for himself is by becoming Baek Do-hyung, who is his brother. Dressed up and holding a knife, the protagonist prepares himself. Raising her finger, Nuna tells him to place his index finger on the back of the knife and hold it because she heard that this way the blade gains more force. However, he questions if anyone would recognize him just by that. Responding, the woman says some people know about it, and if the opponent is from the General Assembly, he should be more cautious. She explains that it's a meeting between the leaders of the largest criminal organizations in Seoul at the General Assembly, with the objective of preventing conflicts between the organizations and promoting mutual cooperation among them. However, the truth is that it's a group that looks for justifications for conflicts to gain advantages for their own interests. Curious, the boy asks if that's why Taishan and he need to attend, and she responds affirmatively, stating that's why he needs to be careful. With a sad look, he says he's not sure if this is the right decision and asks why he needs to play the role of his brother and protect Taishan. Holding the knife, the man asserts that he needs Taishan now because he requires an organization to carry out his revenge. It must be a large organization, and above all sharp. In fury, he declares that both the General Assembly and Taishan will be placed under his feet. At the same time, at the District 3 development project in Susekdong, a man states that it must have been a mess. Smiling, he says that Chief Jung must have worked hard and that his work was very well done, which is incredible. This is Cho Won-ho, the commissioner of the Seoul Metropolitan Police Agency. Jang remarks that the work was easy thanks to the commissioner's support and everyone who was involved, so the commissioner comments that the chief was really great. Cho mentions that he said he buried everyone and asks if the lieutenant's subordinates won't leave any traces. The man responds that it's all a sacrifice for the cause, and clapping and laughing. Cho says that's incredible. He asks if this is the result of working in the shadows to make their country better. Anyway, the members were concerned, and he asks if the North Korean group is an outdated product that doesn't fit with current diplomatic relations. In response, the man says yes. Continuing, he says that the commissioner is right and shouldn't be told what to do. He mentions that he's been busy lately as well. Placing a hand on his shoulder, he keeps talking. With a tense expression, he says he doesn't know why his boss has been piling so much nonsense on him. He questions if it's so difficult to get rid of mere kids. Pointing his finger at his chest, he asks why he encounters accidents here and there, asserting that it harms people. Then he asks if he knows how much manpower and money he spent to cover everything that was done. In response, the lieutenant says he's sorry that it was bigger than expected. Very irritated, the man asks if he wants him to deal with the Taishan organization and explains that it is part of the General Assembly. He questions if he knows what that means. Jang states that he's asking him to handle it because from then on, it's under the commissioner's jurisdiction. Cho questions if he knows what it means to mess with those bastards, but the man addresses the commissioner directly. Taking something from his shirt, he deeply frightens him. Holding a badge, he comments that he has misunderstood everything. He explains that his role in this project is merely to be the police commissioner and that they don't need Cho Won-ho, but rather the power of the state. Throwing the badge far away, he says that if he doesn't like his role, he can step down, and there are many others interested in the position of police commissioner. Someone goes straight to another person, grabbing him by the collar and says that this idiot is acting strange. Grabbing a boy by the shirt, he asks if the commissioner is his friend. Sighing, the commissioner comments that he has quick hands and asks why he threw the badge suddenly. He asks if it wouldn't be better for the man to retrieve it, and looking to the side, he sees Jang knocking the boy down. He throws him to the ground with full force, and finishes with a strong kick to the face. This leaves Cho in shock, along with the man in the background, who calls him crazy. Quickly, he points a gun at the commissioner's head, who is terrified. He asks if he wants to be buried on the spot along with his men, and in desperation, the commissioner says he was wrong. With a completely terrifying look, he tells the commissioner that he just buried his men and asks if he should know what the General Assembly is. Screaming in fear, Cho says he'll take care of the General Assembly and that he knows someone there. Putting away the gun, Jang says they need to do the job well, and the man agrees. Suddenly, he calls the commissioner, saying he wants to meet Baek Do-hyung in person. At the same time, in the meeting room, a man asks if they are saying that Baek Do-hyung was stabbed. This is Ri Tae-hyun, the CDO of Jorang Resort and the leader of the Jorangwi organization, which has taken control of the Yongsan district. He asks if someone didn't say that bastard isn't fit to be here. The blonde man comments that they said he's on a long business trip and questions why he always gets so excited whenever they talk about Bak Do-yeon. This is Han Hae-seong, CEO of HES Entertainment, an entertainment company based in the Gangnam district. Irritated, Ryu questions if he is the only one making a fuss again. He says that a bastard without a legacy and Hamdong getting stabbed is a natural death for a gangster. Joining the conversation, the woman says that it seems to her that CEO Taehyung has decided to throw barbs today and that he seems to have many emotions regarding Bak. This woman is the CEO of Cheonwon Negotiations and the leader of the Korean-Chinese organization headquartered in the Guro district. She is also the director of the tribe responsible for Korean trade. Her name is Che Yuwa. Laughing, Ryu says he's speechless and asks if they are mocking him again, but a man tells him to stop. He asks if there isn't a general assembly to put an end to this annoying friction between them. The man in question is the CEO of Ilhak Capital and also the owner and leader of Gudo, a small organization based in the Jongno district. His name is Lee Sunmin. Extinguishing his cigarette and laughing, he comments that he really seems like a dog to them. Irritated, Ryu tells Lee that if he continues with that talk, the one who will be inconvenienced is him. He remarks that Lee also doesn't have the status to be here and questions why a mere city worker is at the General Assembly. Responding to the provocation, Lee says that the assembly was created by the late CEO of Ilhak, and Selman points out to Sungmin the soy sauce in front of him. Fiddling with his phone, the blonde man asks for some soy sauce because it's a bit too far for him to reach alone. Holding the soy sauce, he sees Ryu, who says the boy is doing well and calls him an idiot. He remarks that the atmosphere has improved and that Sungmin does well in such situations. At that moment, someone enters, announcing that they are here. Surprised, Ryu asks what this is and where the security guards are. Excited, Lee tells the president that they are here, and that the atmosphere in the place is indeed intimidating. Walking calmly, Baek approaches the table. Seeing who it is, everyone is in shock. In his mind, he recognizes that these are the members of the General Assembly. Flashing back, the protagonist realizes there aren't many of them. The most important thing is the relationship diagram, and there is no friendly relationship between the members. Closing the folder, he says he has an idea of what to do, and that the rest he can resolve is Bak Do-yeon. Smiling, the boy asks why the long faces and if everyone missed him. Surprised, Cha asks if he really is President Baek and says that because he cut his hair, she didn't recognize him. Then the man says he wanted to look presentable for her and questions what he should do since she didn't recognize him. Ryu mentions that he heard he was stabbed and asks if he was embarrassed. Besides that, he had to work more due to his absence. Picking something up from the table, he asks if he doesn't use chopsticks and that if he's going to eat with his hands like a baby, he'll use them instead. Hearing this, Ryu becomes irritated and the woman laughs in the background while the blonde man calls out to the president. He comments that while he was away, they had many discussions. Expressing surprise, Baek remarks that he must have been very worried and says he should have bought a souvenir. Han responds that he heard about his brother's death and that he must have gone through difficult times, so he asks if they were close. Intervening in the conversation, Ryu comments that he heard the funeral was noisy and that apparently there were even knife fights. Confirming the story, the girl says she was also there and asks what it all meant. Picking up a glass, the man says that there are already so many stories, so he'll get straight to the point. He asks if the current Bak Do-yeon is qualified for the General Assembly. The boy stands up and asks why they didn't come to help him when they knew he was in trouble. Pulling out a knife out of nowhere, he suddenly plants it into the table in front of everyone. With intense anger, he asks what all of them were saying about Taishan's qualifications. He also asks if they think the General Assembly deserves Taishan. Nervous, Han questions how he should interpret his words now and if he is saying that he will hand all control over to the Assembly. In response, the hero says he'll make it easier for them to understand and begins to explain their position. Staring intimidatingly, he says that from today on, Taishan will no longer attend the General Assembly and they can manage things on their own. Later that night in the car, Baek is sitting in the back seat, deep in thought. Jin comments that the General Assembly has become their enemy and asks if the boy has any kind of plan. Hearing this, he just remains silent and looks to the side. Suddenly, a car appears in the middle of the road. At the wheel, Jin tries to swerve, managing to avoid a collision with the other vehicle. Annoyedly questions what kind of madness just happened. Then 3 identical cars surround them. After the cars come to a stop, someone opens the door. It's Ryu calling for Bak Do-yeon. Walking toward him, he remarks that Baek spoke confidently at the General Assembly today. Cracking his knuckles, he says he will do everything Baek said. He is ready to punch the window. With just one punch, he shatters the glass. Looking back, both Baek and his companions are surprised and worried. With his arm resting on the frame, Ryu begins to speak while Bak just watches in fury. Getting closer to his face, he warns that he's going to start by taking over Taishan and curses him with a vulgar insult. Panicking, Lee stammers and calls for the leader of their team. Turning around, he says that when he presses this, the rearview mirror moves and Jin remarks that it's annoying to drive like that and asks him to stop. Looking at Bak, he mentions that the man said he would put the assembly under his feet and asks if he doesn't mind turning everyone into enemies. In response, Bake says that he will indeed put it under his feet, but that there's something he needs to do first. Before anything, they need to catch the rat within the General Assembly. Curiously asks who he's talking about, and Jin questions why he thinks that. With a serious look, Yisu says that they mentioned knife fights and that the funeral was noisy. One of them says that if they only discussed the funeral, the director had announced his brother's death to the General Assembly. However, Bake says that the knife fight took place at Taishan and has nothing to do with the funeral, which startles the two in front. Nervously, Lee realizes that their leader is right and wonders how he didn't notice. With his hand trembling on the steering wheel, Jin says that someone within the General Assembly really knows what's happening. Yisu mentions that they should avoid attending the General Assembly until they find the rat. The driver then asks how he plans to find him. He comments that he dug a rat hole. He wonders if the rat will crawl into this hole on its own. Staring at his enemy, Ryu asks the fake Do Hyung if he's going to get out of the car. He questions if he won't get out and if he needs to pull him out somehow. This is Ryu Taehyung from the General Assembly. Being the leader of Jorang, he's already had numerous issues with Taishan before, so there's a clear hostility. Looking at him, Bak wonders if this guy is actually the rat he's looking for. Leaning out the window, Lee asks why he didn't ask to open the window instead of breaking it, pointing out that the car is quite expensive. He says that Ryu doesn't even use chopsticks to eat, and that his manners are horrible. With a dark expression, Ryu comments that the blonde kid is the same bastard from before, asking what he just said. Getting out of the car, the blonde boy questions what he's going to do about it and mentions that he rode in this car for the first time today and felt great. In response, Ryu says that this idiot is challenging him and that he likes him, so he invites him to work with him instead of working for Bak. However, the boy replies that he's not interested in doing that. He tells them to take the man to the workshop to pay for the car repair, and then a fist comes toward his face. It looks like he manages to land the punch. However, the boy catches his fist and asks if he has a habit of punching things and if, by any chance, he's a bully. Showing off brass knuckles, Ryu is surprised that he blocked the blow and comments that he really likes him. Suddenly, several white cars appear. Excited, he asks what this is and if they're going to have a party here. He asks Lee Sungmin if that's really how it's going to be. With a cold look, Lee tells him to stop right there. This is Lee Sungmin, the leader of the Nine Knives and CEO of Ilhat Capital. Smiling, Ryu comments that young Master Sungmin is telling him to stop, so he will obey. Nonetheless, he asks if he liked what he saw earlier because he followed him here. Approaching, he says they're going to have a party after the General Assembly and asks if the man would like to join them. However, he adds that he's not sure if the people from Ilhat can handle it. Someone shows up, placing a hand on the bully's shoulder and laughing, saying he almost forgot. He mentions that his mouth is still as sweet as ever. The man in question comments that it seems like he was crying yesterday over the cut on his stomach and says he's grown a lot. Looking back, Ryu realizes that this man is Choi Chien-ho of the Nine Knives and asks why he's even here, considering how old he is. Leaning against the window, Lee asks what's going on and says it looks like those two are filming a drama and wonders if it's okay for them to get involved. Adjusting his tie, Jin mentions that he is part of the Nine Knives, an elite unit of Ilhak, and that he's surprised to see him here. According to rumors, Ilhak's power has only diminished recently, but it was once an organization at the top of the capital Seoul. It was the 9 elite members who made all of that happen. These 9 members are called the Nine Knives. Then Lee says that if they only look at him, this gangster narrative seems surreal. However, judging by the reactions of these people, it doesn't seem to be a lie, but rather real. Several people around recognize Choi Chien-ho of the Nine Knives and become frightened. Seeing them all, the old man just stares, saying that young people these days are all cowards. This is the executive director of Ilhat Capital and captain of the Nine Knives, holding the title of the second Mafe. Deeply irritated, Ryo questions if he really has to back down like this. His business is with Taishan, so why is Ilhak helping them? Suddenly, Jin walks toward the old man, saying it's been a while. The captain is pleased to see him and comments that he has grown a lot, and Jin says he should have visited him to say hello, but they ended up meeting like this. In the background, Sungmin calls for Ryu and says he'd like to have Taishan as guests and asks if that's okay with him. Pretending not to care, the man says they can do as they please. He shouts for the car to be prepared immediately. Laughing quietly, Lee comments that this guy is an idiot for showing off for no reason. Approaching the broken window, the CEO of Ilhat calls for Bake, inviting him into his car since his window is broken. Hearing this, Insu is surprised and wonders what the man is thinking. Accepting the invitation, he steps out of the car and comments that it was a bit rough, to which the man laughs and says he doesn't know how to converse properly. Choi says he'll take 2 minutes and that he wants to talk to his friend about old times, and Jin confirms he will go with the director. Beck says it's fine and that Cheyenne will go with him, adding that the car is so small he might not fit if he goes too. Cheyenne remarks that it's not that small after all. Inside the car, Sungmin asks if he's really leaving the General Assembly. Bake questions if he didn't want to remove or expel him and says he just got irritated because he was questioning his qualifications. Then the man says that if he leaves the assembly like that, there will be severe conflicts with other organizations. Looking to the side, the protagonist agrees, saying that considering how he was suddenly attacked today, he should have made the guy pay for the repairs. In his mind, he wonders what Lee Sungmin is trying to imply. The man comments that the assembly is a place where there's nothing but fights and competition between organizations, so he needs strength to survive. Confused, the hero asks what he means by that. A while later, the car comes to a stop. The man then calls for Do-Won. With a serious expression, he says that he needs strength now. Then someone starts knocking on the window. At that moment, Baek turns to see what it is. Elsewhere, the old man is looking at the broken window and comments that compared to a gorilla, Ryu's punches aren't bad. He asks Jinwon why he doesn't come to Ilhak, and Jin tells him to stop talking about that because his place is with Taishin. The old man then questions if he isn't part of the Nine Knives and says his spot is still available. Looking back, Jin states that his organization is Taishin, and above all, there is a lot of work to be done there. After hearing this, the old man says there's nothing left for him to do. He warns that Taishin will fall today and that it's all over now, which surprises Jin. Back to the protagonist, someone calls him by his brother's name. He says that from now on, the Nine Knives will guide him. Surprised, the boy asks what that means, and Sungmin responds that for them, this was the best they could do. Putting his hands on his face, he remains silent. But as he approaches the man, he asks if he was the rat. Then he calls Xian's attention. He asks him to keep Sungmin right there. Following the order, Xian agrees, and one of the men says he's being bold. Without hesitation, the blonde boy lands a solid punch on the man's face. Looking at his unconscious body, he comments that he's too loud and should stay quiet. Beck says it will take some time. Facing a bald man with glasses, he says it won't take too long either. Ryu is thinking that Lee Sungmin is a bastard. While smoking, he wonders why Sungmin is betraying the Nine Knives group. Curious, the driver asks if the Nine Knives are really that strong. He mentions that they recruited many for the team this time and that he should take advantage of the opportunity. But his boss asks if he's gone mad. He slaps the man on the back of the neck and asks if he wants his boss to get screwed. Leaning back in his seat, he comments that the driver is saying this because he knows nothing and asks if he knows how Ilhak unified Seoul in the past. He questions how he still manages to get involved in the General Assembly without knowing that. He pinches the driver's cheeks, who remains silent. He continues saying that back then he thought the same way. There are 9 knives in Ilhak. He mentions that he saw with his own eyes. Only 3 of the 9 knives destroying an entire organization in the Gangbuk area. At that time, there were 9 of them, and now there might be 6. But regardless, even if there are only 3 people, their opponents would still be humiliated in every way. He concludes by asking what kind of madman would fight against the 9 knives. Returning to the protagonist, who is punching one of them, Ryu wonders if there is anyone who can defeat this group. Beck is punching the bald man non-stop. The CEO, Ryu, comments that a guy like this could dominate all of Seoul if he managed to. Near a lake, someone says they are speaking out of courtesy. With a cigarette in hand, the commissioner says that Taishin is no longer what it used to be and is just a mountain behind the city. He continues, saying that back Do-Won got rid of his own younger brother due to his superior's project. However, Taishin got caught in the middle of all this and things became complicated. At this moment, Ilhak needs to strike first. Sungmin is sitting listening to the old man. He begins to speak, saying that he has neither a good cause nor the strength to wage a war now, and the old man says that if he is foolish, he will lose everything. Regardless, the young master is a very attentive person. Ilhak is in this state because Sungmin is clumsy, and if the former CDO had seen this before dying, he would have been furious. He continues, saying that even at the General Assembly, if someone mentions the 9 knives, they cannot say anything, so he asks why he doesn't use that card. He says he is helping him because he truly cares about the boy and that they will rebuild Ilhak. After this, the man gets up from his chair. He asserts that they will destroy Taishin, and the old man says he's finally got the spirit of things. With a distant look, Sungmin asks to let them participate in that project as well. Reacting to the statement, the old man just observes. He comments that the young master is eating well and that it was actually a compliment. He explains that it's called one sink and questions how Ilhak could secure a spot. Returning to the protagonist, his fist approaches while the man comments on his courage. He quickly lands an uppercut to the man's chin. Charging forward, he unleashes a series of punches. This causes the man to fall headfirst to the ground. Back then asks if he planned to get rid of him to destroy Taishin, and says that it's a mistake on his part, whether through someone's investigation or his own judgment. Either way, he's mistaken. He says he came to him. With a dark look, he came here to declare that Ilhak will collapse today. This catches the attention of Ilhak's CDO inside the car. A knife is thrown close to his face, startling him. With the knife in hand, Lee asks if he didn't hear. Smiling, he says that he's not leaving now. Sungmin starts to become tense and nervous, deciding to stay silent. Outside, the bald man removes his glasses and says that his hands haven't felt sore in a long time, and that if he were 10 years younger, he wouldn't have been a headache. One of his colleagues tells Hyung-Nim that he thought the man could dodge that, and another, laughing, says it's been a while since he saw the bald man take a beating. Approaching him, someone asks if it was refreshing, and the bald man asks if he's just going to watch. Suddenly, he leaps with speed. Charging at the protagonist, he responds that he's not just going to watch. However, the hero manages to block the strike. Another opponent tries to hit him, but he dodges again. However, this time the man grabs the hero by the shirt. Throwing him to the ground, he shouts that Ilhak has the 9 knives and this is Choi Wangpal, the 7th knife. On the ground, Bake sees a foot approaching. This is Li Juchang, the 9th knife, who kicks the protagonist hard in the face and asks if he wants to destroy Ilhak. In a reflexive move, Yisu manages to block the strike with his arm. Quickly, another figure appears, ready to punch. This is the 8th knife, Jane Diokbe. He lands a punch on the ground as the hero manages to dodge. Yisu thinks that all of them are strong. The bald man grabs his shoulder, preparing to attack. At that moment, the boy also thinks they're skilled at pincer attacks. Pincer attacks are a military maneuver in which the opponent's flanks are attacked simultaneously by 2 defensive wings. Dodging the punch, Bake realizes he needs to break their formation before taking them down one by one. Counterattacking, he lands a direct punch to the bald man's jaw. The punch is strong enough to send the man stumbling back. His colleague rushes in to help, grabbing the bald man and asks if he's too old or just sleepy at the moment. He wonders if the young master didn't tell him. Meanwhile, the bald man is nearly unconscious, unable to fully comprehend what's happening. Charging forward, his colleague asserts that they need to destroy Taishin and grabs the boy by the arm. Holding onto his shirt, he states that they cannot disappoint the young master. He then grabs Bak's head by the back of the neck. This is Lee Sumong, the 6th knife. Facing the hero appears Dako Younggil, the 4th knife, who delivers a powerful punch to the boy's face. Inside the car, Lee, frightened, asks who these guys are. From the back seat, the CEO comments that they are Ilhak's ace, the 9 knives. Everyone says that the glory days of the past are gone and that they're no longer what they used to be. However, there's something they always forget. Elsewhere, someone is thrown onto the windshield. It's Jin, and meanwhile, the old man tells him not to fight anymore. He continues saying that this is all he can say for old time's sake. Lying on the hood, Jin thinks that Ilhak still has the 9 knives to fight. Back to the protagonist. Getting out of the car, Lee comments that these old gangsters are complicated and tells Sunmin not to go anywhere. Then the man questions if he really thinks 2 people can handle the 9 knives. He says that even if he goes, he won't be able to help, and Lee wonders what he means by help. He says he doesn't need it, and that he probably has no idea who he's dealing with. He responds to Lee's Sunmin, saying that if he doesn't go, those guys will end up dying. The protagonist punches one of them in the stomach, then notices something approaching. One of the 9 knives punches him from behind. Looking into his eyes, the attacker tells him to give up now and says that Taishin has fallen. Several members of the group close in on him. At the same time, Lee runs to the scene. He kicks one of them with full force. They ask if the boy is also going to interfere in this. He replies that he can't go all out yet and asks if they think it's better to deal with him first, calling them old-timers. A fist comes toward the protagonist, but he instantly manages to block and counter. Seeing this, everyone is surprised. Holding his arm, Sumong says his joint is dislocated and that he can't move his arm. Stammering, one of the bald men appears, asking for a minute. Holding onto the hero, Wang Pal prepares to kick. With a serious expression, the boy charges with full force, remembering the past when his instructor was sparring with him and asking if he was stronger or bigger than him. He says that he doesn't have the talent for this and that if he falls and is in pain, he should just give up. He continues saying that some people are like this. They're full of energy and have strong mental fortitude, so they never give up. In such cases, he instructs him to pull the arms or legs and hold them so they don't move. Even if someone has strong mental fortitude, in the end their body won't be able to endure. Sweating heavily, Yisu tells his instructor that it hurts. Staring at him, the man calls his name, telling them to try again. Back in the present, Wang is on the ground, writhing in pain, while in the background, the protagonist watches the scene. Frightened, the bald man questions what kind of monster Bak Do-young is. Inside the car, someone shouts for Beck, when suddenly he notices something and falls silent. He recalls a scene from the past. The old man asked about Bak Do-young, and the CEO asks what he's talking about. The commissioner explains that his younger brother once said he was a gangster and wonders if Bak Do-young is a bit different from other gangsters. Quickly, he becomes awkward, saying he almost got caught during fishing. Continuing the conversation, he says he doesn't remember Bak's younger brother's name, and the man remains silent. Returning to the present, someone is lying on the ground. With his arms broken, the bald man angrily repeats the name Bak Do-young. In a second, the hero charges forward to finish the man off. However, someone yells for him to stop, and he does. Approaching with his hand in his pocket, the CEO says that's enough. Relieved, the bald man calls for his young master while the protagonist remains silent. Placing a hand on his shoulder, he says they need to talk now. He then calls the boy by his real name, Bak Yisu. In his mind, Sunmin says he has felt something strange from the beginning. Although Bak Yisu, who had been a problem, died, the reason why his older brother, Bak Do-young, must die is because in the end they are twins. The CEO says that Bak's aggressive behavior at the General Assembly and the fighting style he just showed confirm what he already suspected. This is not Bak Do-young. Slapping his hand away, the boy asks if it matters and if knowing who he is will spare his life, then stares at him with a frightening look. Closing his eyes, the man calls Bak Yisu, but corrects himself to director Bak Do-young and says he proposes a negotiation. Hearing this, the protagonist remains silent. Someone appears, signaling for time. Laughing, Lee says the two seem to be discussing something, so they should make a truce. One of the men sighs and says he did well. After a while, each side is standing with their subordinates. Sitting in the chair, the man admits they were careless. Standing, the old man asks if he's alright and questions if Baek managed to do all this alone. Replying, the bald man says it's embarrassing, but yes, this guy is a monster and his level's ahead of them. With a deadly gaze, the hero asks what kind of negotiation he wants to propose. Lee notices his colleague next to him. He starts to say that the guy standing is fine and that he's the only one. He asks if he can see the other guys behind them to kick their butts, but Jin comments that he was beaten up by the old man. Surprised, the boy says he understands that he was beaten, and Jin tells him to focus. One of the subordinates brings a clipboard to the CEO, who says they received a request to eliminate Taishin, and that the answer to who did it and what the purpose was is in this file. In response, Baek asks him to continue. The CDO says they will provide the file and information about the organization targeting Taishin and that, in exchange, they want them to side with Ilhak. In his mind, he thinks that Ilhak needs strength and that this is a good condition for Taishin as well. Quickly, the boy responds with a no. If the files and information are the conditions, these negotiations are over. With a murderous look, he says that if that's the case, wouldn't it be better to just destroy Ilhak and take everything they need right now? Smiling, the old man says the kid's arrogance is too much. Jin appears in front of him, saying that if the gentleman doesn't mind, he asks if it isn't a good deal for them too, and that this is the chance to build trust with Ilhak. Baek comments that he's tired of all this. He asks what Ilhak really is, responding that they are gangsters in the end. He comments on the issue of trust, questioning why he thinks his companions and his brother ended up dying that way. Jinwoo stares down at him and calls him Bak Yisu. However, the protagonist grabs him by the shirt. Staring angrily, he says he's Bak Doyeon. Intervening, Lee asks them to stay calm, and if they keep doing this, he will have to intervene too. He says they should look at this first. Sunmin just watches everything with a clipboard. Bak stares back at him. Then he approaches his opponent or future ally. The man says he doesn't think it's a bad deal, and the hero responds that it's just a piece of paper and questions how he can trust them. Near the flames, the man tells him to be careful with his words and actions, as this is the only copy. Taking a knife, he says to go ahead with it. In the background, Jin yells for his director Baek while he shouts Ilhak, declaring he doesn't trust them and calling them filthy rats. Holding the knife, he says he doesn't trust anyone. Staring with a terrifying look, he says he doesn't care about this negotiation, and that from now on, it will be like this. When he commands, the group will obey. From now on, Ilhak will be accepted as a subordinate organization of Taishin. Seeing this, Jin and Lee become nervous. Continuing, the man says that as a guarantee, he will take Lee Sungmin, the CEO of Ilhak, as a hostage. Seeing this, one of the men calls the Taishin people bastards. The old man calls for his group 9 Blades, ordering them not to move. Intervening in the fight and grabbing the wrist, he says that Director Baek is going too far. He then asks the CDO for permission, introducing himself as Choi Chien-ho, the captain of the 9 Blades, and says he will go with him to Taishin. He then asks if this arrangement is acceptable. Baek says he mentioned the CEO of Ilhak and asks if the old man's neck is worth that much, questioning who the arrogant one really is. Lee feels uneasy about the situation too. Jin says the 9 Blades are the body of Ilhak, and he thinks that should be enough. The hero asks if that's for him to judge, and Jin says that if he could see things from his brother's perspective, he wouldn't say that. Hearing this, the boy remains silent. That the boy tells Lee Xian that he is in charge of protecting and monitoring Choi Chien-ho. Jin simply watches his boss giving orders. Going back in time 5 years ago, a man tells them to start recording, and inside the room, another man comments that from what he's hearing, Bak Yisu is a member of Baekdu fighting against Popular Korea. The man then confirms the information. This is Bak Yisu 5 years ago, who returned from Popular Korea after a long-term infiltration and is currently under investigation for espionage consultations. Looking through some papers, he asks about his mission, and Bak responds that it is confidential. This is Kim Ji-wook, the lieutenant colonel. Continuing, he says that in their situation, he's a man who crossed the military demarcation line and asks if there's anything in the background check. The boy responds that due to the nature of the mission, all background records of the operation team were erased. Kim asks him to state his immediate superior or the location of his unit. Again, the boy says it's confidential and that if they provide a secure line, he'll make contact. At this, the man stands up. He says they hate his North Korean operation team, recalling when he talked about gathering strength with subordinates, then comments that he may have been mistaken, but there's nothing he can do. Snapping his fingers, he tells Bak Yisu that he will do as he commands. Getting close to the young man's face, he says that if he declares him a communist, he will become one. He says he's done a lot of dirty work anyway, and he will use this opportunity to get rid of them once and for all. Suddenly, Jang appears, greeting them and introducing himself as Major Jang Shangho, head of the Special Operations Unit of the Intelligence Command. He says he heard from one of his men that he's being held here. Kim says it's no big deal, and that catching this damn spy is his job. Laughing, Jang asks if the man is joking because the boy is like his own son and not a spy. Taking a cigarette from the box, he calls for the major and asks if he thinks he's actually joking. He says he had just mentioned that. With a cigarette in his mouth, he asserts that the boy is indeed a spy. Surprised, Jang comments that this must be a misunderstanding, and Kim says he's an idiot because he needs to prove that there are no misunderstandings here. He then starts lighting his cigarette. Surprisingly, Jang approaches, taking off his glasses, and comments that he had just said that the boy is like his son, and that he can make up anything. But if he himself says his son isn't a communist, then he isn't. After that, he begins to leave the room with Bak Yisu and very irritated. Kim says this is insubordination. He yells for his subordinates to catch the two bastards. However, when he steps outside, he sees everyone lying on the ground and asks what's going on. Outside, Jang comments about Baek getting into trouble as soon as he returned. In response, Yisu says the guy didn't believe him even after explaining it was a confidential operation. Laughing, the man asks who would believe him after seeing his face and says he should have just said he had just defected. He explains that he trusts him because they are family. Then he tells him to look at his own hair. But he says that if his daughter says he's a spy, logically, he'll be one, so he'll have to shoot him. Hearing this, the boy begins to smile. As they descend the stairs, he asks if Colonel Kim isn't higher in rank than a lieutenant. Responding, Jang says they did all of this because he entered there. From afar, two soldiers wave, asking why it took them so long. He tells them to eat something because they're starving. Laughing, one of them asks what happened to Ba's hair. Everyone is happy and having fun, and Jang extends his hand saying, "Welcome back, team leader Bak Yisu." Back in the present, he is looking at a picture from that time. Sitting in an armchair, he hears a knock and says to come in. It's Jin, who explains that Kyan is monitoring Choi Chunho as the boss ordered. With his hands on his face, Yisu thanks him for the hard work, and Jin comments that Taishin is his responsibility. Changing the subject, he says he needs to mention something else, and the protagonist assumes it's about Ilhak. At that moment, he grabs the boy by the collar, saying he was wrong about this, and asserts that he cannot hand over Taishin to him, because the boy cannot be Bak Do-young. Jang is at a diner calling his daughter, and she asks if he has eaten yet. The man responds that he is eating well, and says he knows she is busy with her studies but should also eat plenty. He explains that he's not scolding her, just concerned, and in the background, one of his subordinates arrives. With a strange look, he says he knows many good places and that he should join him at one of them. Then he asks why he chose to eat at this place. Jang makes a gesture of silence to his employee and continues the conversation with his daughter, saying it's just a bit noisy where he is eating. Sitting at the table, he asks the aunt to bring the same as his friend, just without the tripe. His colleague still remains on the call, and then tells his daughter that he'll call again soon, saying goodbye. The man with glasses asks if it was his daughter, and from what he heard, she's studying abroad. Then he asks if she has returned. Changing the topic, Jang asks the commissioner if he has finished his work at the General Assembly. Responding, he says he did his part and that Jang just needs to act accordingly. He then asks the man if he had any stomach issues after doing his work, noting he hasn't heard from him in a while. Jang responds, saying that the General Assembly is just gangs in the end. He asks if they aren't wasting their time in this way. He says this while adding some rice to his meal. The commissioner comments that he's doing it again and that if he eats it immediately, it'll burn his mouth. He says he also worked hard, but those guys aren't easy to deal with at all. Without his glasses, he admits Jang has good skills, but it won't help if he assumes they're easy. Hearing this, Jang asks if he's just using amateurs and says that people need to be professionals to do this kind of work. He also mentions they don't have much time before the start of the One Sync project. He continues saying that it seems he himself will have to find those people from the General Assembly. Curious, the commissioner asks if he's talking about Xiaomin or planning something new. Sharing his opinion, he says it seems Jang is right that to start the One Sync project, they need to control the General Assembly. From that point, once the parliament members receive some kind of benefit, their work will proceed without any problems. Then Jang says that in the end, it's Beck and his team, and he's confident that the defense security will handle it and take care of them. The commissioner then says that thanks to this opportunity, they can see the skills of the newcomers. With a cold look, Jang tells the commissioner that if he wants to make a choice, then he can go ahead and do so. Picking up his rice, the man begins to speak, responding that this, in fact, is going to be a complete mess. Back to the protagonist. He's sitting in the armchair, analyzing several papers, and asks if this is everything. He then pulls out a paper from the pocket of his shirt. Looking at his picture from 5 years ago with his team, he questions if that's why they killed all of them. Suddenly, Jin starts knocking on the door, and the protagonist tells him he can come in. The muscular man asks for permission. Approaching, he explains that Shun is monitoring Shou and Xiaonan, and the protagonist thanks him for his hard work. At the same time, elsewhere, the old man is on the phone and says nothing happened to him. He also mentions that Taishin isn't so bad and that he feels like he's on vacation, so that's good. The man from the island apologizes, saying he's very inexperienced, and the old man agrees that he is indeed an amateur. However, he says that this was a decision made by his organization, and that they all acted according to his will. Smiling, he says that this is a decision they trust and will follow. Although the outcome hasn't been good from the start, he doesn't think it was a bad decision. Relieved, Lai says he'll see him soon. On the other end of the line, the old man says there's no need to hurry and that he can take a good rest in the place. The blonde man comments that it's cute, as if the boy isn't his boss, but his grandson. Laughing, the old man explains that this grandson is the lord of the island. Shinji was surprised and says that even after he left him with his group, he questions what would happen to the old man if they decided to harm him. Looking at the plate of food, the man replies that this was also his choice, so he has to live according to it. Surprised, the blonde man asks if this wasn't his boss's decision, stating that orders are just orders in the end and that, after all, he was sent here by him. However, the man says it's a little different from what he thinks. He questions if Taishin is that kind of organization, and in that case, says Taishin, as expected, is a bit disappointing. Hearing this, the blonde man becomes a bit confused. Back in the protagonist's room, Jin says he thinks he made a mistake, asserting that he cannot hand Taishin over to him. He asks him to give up, and the boy slaps his hand away, saying he already gave Taishin to him and asks if he wants it back like a spoiled child. He comments that the man is here for Taishin, but he is here for his revenge, and that's how he put the island in his hands, so there's no problem with it. However, the muscular man responds that he already told the boy that his methods are the problem, and that before anything else, he needs to do things like his brother. A bit tired of this, the boy responds that's why he's acting like him. However, Jim replies that his brother wouldn't do things like this for the organization. He explains that the organization trusts his brother, which is why they appointed him as the boss, so he should make it feel like he's the same person. Hearing all this, Beck starts to get a little irritated, saying that trusting in methods must be the reason why they are playing like children at the General Assembly. Questioning trust, he says that this organization shouldn't act according to the boss's orders, and regarding the method, he says that, like a gangster, they use their fists. Staring at the muscular man, he asks what the problem is here. Taking off his jacket, the man calls him by name, saying that first of all, he should step up so they can see who the child in the room is. In response, the kid just remains silent, then decides to move forward, hitting with his knee, which the man quickly blocks. Jin then decides to grab the kid by the collar again, throwing him hard onto the ground. Feeling a bit of pain, he then kicks with the sole of his foot straight to the man's chin. But Jin asks if that's all and if that's the full strength of an intelligence agent. However, the kick is strong enough to send him flying. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Bake begins to stand up. His kick was strong enough to leave a bruise on the man's face. At the same time, the old man is talking to Jin, saying that an organization built solely on strength asks who would follow such an organization, and that people sometimes call them a gang, asking if the boy knows why. He says that they trust others using their fists and self-respect, and that war is called that because people unite and fight for the same interests. He explains that if he starts getting rid of people who would only fight and betray, he questions if there will be anyone he can trust and follow. Meanwhile, the director's office is a mess with an armchair knocked over and many papers scattered. The hero ended up winning the fight and is holding Jin down on the floor by his shirt. However, he decides not to finish him off right there. Walking away, he says that apparently he was wrong. He comments that his methods of acting like a gangster weren't really the problem. The old man explains that it's not necessarily who is superior or inferior that is decided by their strength. He explains that if an organization starts ranking superiority based on strength, then they are just military. The blonde man is surprised and says that he's right. The military works like that. His phone then starts to ring. Walking away and waving, the boy says it was fun and that they should talk again, asking them to enjoy their stay at the hotel. The old man asks if he shouldn't be keeping an eye on him. In response, the blonde man says he doesn't seem like someone who would run away, but he personally believes they rely on strength because they can't trust anyone. Sometime later, Lee approaches the director, who comments that from now on, they'll do things their way. He explains that they will create a new organization with capable people. He asks him to get in touch with those guys he mentioned before because, since they are professionals, they need to do this professionally too. He informs him that his deadline is 1 week and that he will destroy the General Assembly within that time as well. Jin is lying on the floor with his hand on his face. He begins to think of one of his memories. Going back to 4 years ago, he has long hair and asks someone why he kept coming here. In response, the man says he wouldn't come to a restaurant if not to eat and questions why the boss is speaking that way. He asks if he shouldn't treat his regular customers better, noting they aren't even good at the basics of business, which is why this place isn't doing well. This is back to Hayam, director of the TS Financial Group and executive director of Oyama Gumi. The muscular man asks if smoking in the restaurant is normal and Bak apologizes, saying it has become a habit. He then asks if the customers lying on the floor are from here. However, the muscular man tells the boy to leave before things get complicated and Bake questions if it isn't too late for that. Suddenly, someone else enters the kitchen, saying he thought it was just a terrible rumor. But seeing the state of the boys there, he realizes this is definitely Hajin Hyuk. He asks why he's no longer working with the Alyarch, and if he's afraid of ending up dead like his boss. This is President Lee Hyun Kikun of the affiliated Gyoreng organization of hook loans. Intervening in the conversation, Bake says that the boss here doesn't accept gangsters as clients and that he's fine because he's a regular customer. Confused, the man asks what he's talking about and questions if he's brave or just plain stupid. He then begins to scrutinize the boy. Placing his hand on his face, he comments that it could have been him who did this to his boys and says he is really stupid. He says the boy is good looking, so maybe he could sell him somewhere, but that it could also be a waste. Speaking in Korean, the boy remarks that it's ridiculous for him to call himself Hook. He says that since he's from Hook, he shouldn't have a hand, making a sort of joke, then stabs the man. After taking the blow, Lee starts screaming in pain. He curses them, calling them all sorts of names. He asks if he has any idea who he's messing with and says they are Hook loans of the Gyoring organization. He says he's in big trouble once Gyoring finds out about this. In response, the crazy teenager asks if he thinks he cares about that, saying they are Taishan. He comments that he can go ahead and bring Gyoring here or anywhere else. One of the employees tells Hook to go to the hospital. He asks if the boy will really let them go like that and questions what he will do against Gyoring. The muscular Hook responds that it's rare hearing that from him and asks if he wasn't the one who opened the restaurant here just to keep an eye on the guys. He comments that the place is full of dust and doesn't even have a menu. He says it's hard to believe he's running the business this way and that clearly he just wants to beat up any thug who comes here. Turning to the man, he says he wants to help with that, so he invites him. Jin asks if the boy knows what kind of people they are, and the boy responds that they are Taishan and that it doesn't matter who they are. Offering him a hair tie, he tells him to at least tie his hair up because the butcher can't have his hair messy like that. The boy then thanks him and says the muscular man's food is terrible and that he really should stop cooking. He's serious about it. Returning to the present, the man still has that hair tied to this day. He then starts staring at his wrist. He decides to remain lying on the floor even after being beaten up. Apparently, Hook is still alive. He's missing 2 fingers on his left hand and says he still can't get used to it. However, he says that today is their day of revenge and that he has never forgotten the shame and pain of that day, not even for a moment, over the past 4 years. He says that now that Taishan is weak, it can be removed from the General Assembly, and they will bring it down today. He disperses the subordinates, and they begin. This lone organization, Hook, is associated with Gyoring, which has a total of 50 people in its squad. Suddenly, someone starts banging on their door. A man wearing a cap kicks the door open and kicks someone with full force. The bald man and the man with black hair are startled. With an overwhelming and terrifying aura, a man in a cap enters the establishment. It appears that this man's name is Boris. Rewinding a bit, he was carrying some cement bags and someone asked Boris if he saw who did this. It seems to be the foreman, who asks again if he saw who was responsible. He's talking about someone who sprayed paint on the wall of the construction site. Seeing this, the bald man remains silent. Back to the protagonist, Cheyenne asks about Boris. He asks if he's talking about Chaka and if he hasn't returned to Russia. In response, the protagonist says that he's currently hiding as a foreign worker. He mentions that he hasn't found the traitor yet, so he won't be returning for now. This is Boris, a security inspector for the Russian Mafia, the hunting dog of the boss. His name is Chaka. The protagonist enters the warehouse to speak with Boris, who approaches him with a knife. He thinks about Chaka and questions if someone like him would really work with both sides. After all, even his nickname is intimidating. The boy then pulls out a USB drive. He explains that he came here to negotiate. Suspicious, the man begins to inspect the USB drive. Silently, he removes his helmet. That tattoo symbolizes a demon on his head, and that's why he's known as the demon wearing human skin. Back in the present, he is entering the hideout of the Hook Loan Company, and Cyan asks who the hell this pale guy is. He questions how he dares to interfere on such an important day and orders his soldiers to get rid of him. Quickly, the men charge at the bald man. However, he points a firearm at his head. Both are frightened by the presence of the weapon in the place. Without needing to shoot, Boris hits one of them on the head with the butt of the gun, immediately scaring his colleague. Singh begins to try to pull a knife from his coat. Smiling, Boris calls him an idiot in Russian. Without even needing to use his weapon, he punches with his left hand, making the man spit blood and disarming him. The captain of Hook reiterates for them to take him down, to go after the big guy trying to immobilize him. One says he managed to grab him, but the opponent doesn't seem too worried. Suddenly, Boris bites his arm, completely shocking the employee. He bites with all his strength, grabs the man by the arm, and throws him hard to the ground, severely injuring him. After this brawl, the man grabs a knife, pointing it directly at one of the employees' heads. He then decides to execute him coldly. Seeing this scene, the boss starts to become very frightened, questioning what's going on. Meanwhile, the massacre continues right before his eyes. Speaking in Russian, Boris comments that every human has a demon inside them to hide their true weakness. He then grabs the Hook captain by the hair, and the man asks what he's doing and begs him to let go. With a knife pointed at his head, he speaks in Russian and asks if there's a demon inside him too. Intervening, Lee asks Boris to stop right now. Smiling, he says he's doing a good job, but he must stop now. Completely defeated, the Hook captain asks who they are and who sent the two of them. He says they are from Gyoring. With the phone in hand, he says they know why they're here, because they are from Taishan. Calling the director, he informs him that the GC loan company of Gyoring is now theirs. The number of troops in the Hook Loan Company has dropped from 50 to just 1 person, with only the leader surviving. On his knees, the man can't believe it and questions if Taishan is now an international company. Beck says it was a good job and asks if it's Boris. He says the Russians are really not messing around and that their methods are extremely violent. He mentions to the team leader about the iron turret and says he's against it. He acknowledges his skills but asks if they can really trust him. In response, he says that his skills aren't to be underestimated and above all, he's a person who always works for money. As difficult as it may be, first of all, are you sure capitalism will work with him? Suddenly, someone appears behind the hero, cursing him and calling him a bastard. Then the same person says that he better have something right to say. The boy questions who sent him. Then the protagonist realizes he is an Argentinian North Korean. The boy continues asking the protagonist who sent him. He says that if he's not with South Korea, his superiors sent him. This is the worker from Danum, whose codename is Iron Weasel. His name is Lin Junhee, 17 years old, and he is one of the main surveillance targets of ENIS, and he is currently on the run. Especially Bae, who thinks he is against this and that this guy is very young. But without caring about anything, the boy tries to hit the protagonist, who manages to dodge. They begin to fight while the man thinks he is young but can trust his skills. Then, a knife is thrown up high. The hero comments that it's been a while and calls him Iron Weasel. Surprised, the boy asks if he already knows him and if they have met before. Getting closer, the boy says he is sure he killed everyone who knew him when he came to South Korea. In his mind, he thinks that even though this seems like a normal child, he thought he had killed all of his comrades before fleeing to South Korea. Showing the flashback from 3 years ago at the Gyeil-song Industrial Complex. The man asks everyone to be quiet and, introducing himself, says his name is Lee Yu-chang, the head of the reconnaissance department. Then he asks his comrades if they know where they are. He says this is where the South and the North meet to make profits in the Gyeil-song Industrial Complex. He comments that they manufacture the products in North Korea and bring them to the South to sell them. He mentions that, in other words, they are doing dirty work for those capitalist pigs from the South. He asks if they can tolerate this kind of capitalism. This is the head of the special operations team that has been created, belonging to the reconnaissance department, Lee Yu-chang, with 4 years of long-term infiltration experience in the South. With his fist trembling, he comments that those pigs from the South are despising them, so be it. He says that the People's Korea will do this, so they must manufacture the products. However, they will not just be making products to fuel the flames of capitalism. This way, they will also be able to create true beasts. This is Operation Iron Weasel. Then he tells his comrades that this will be your mission. Operation Iron Weasel is an operation involving the use of a route near the South to deploy agents in the Gyeil-song Industrial Complex. Producing goods in the factory during the day and training to become agents at night, they will plan to enter the South along with the products they manufacture. However, this plan had several factors that were overlooked. Someone begins to call the boy, and this catches his attention. It's a man carrying something in his hands. It looks like some kind of candy, and he asks him to take it with him and give it to the others as well. He tells him to eat slowly and not to forget to share with his friends. While eating, the boy says that Lin is his surname. The taste of capitalism was very stimulating for the children in the factory, especially for Gyayong Ingshin, who came from the countryside. It was like some kind of reward for all this hard training. Then 2 years pass after that. Several children are training right now. One of the adults asks how much longer it will take, and the other responds that after completing the ideological training, it will be another 2 years before they can implement it. The other says it needs to be this week. He orders them to implement it by this week, as these are orders from above. The Gyeil-song Industrial Complex will be closed, so everything must be prepared properly. The man thinks this is not good, and the boy in the background questions what's wrong with him and why his face is turning pale. The army needs to show results. The man realizes the boy is there and comments that they told him the goods would be delivered today. He tells him he must wait in this place until nightfall. The army chief explains the plan and says they must put them in the truck and take them to the South. Already at nightfall, the boy is still eating his candy. His colleague tells him to let it go, as he will be able to eat as much as he wants when he gets to South Korea, and this surprises the boy. One of them says he will take care of the driver, so the others must get ready. Seeing that the driver was the kind man, the boy is shocked, asking why the driver. One of the children comments that he won't willingly take them to the South, so they need to get rid of him. However, the boy says there must be another way and asks to let him think for a moment. With a knife in hand, the boy tells him to stop playing around and they don't have time. Telling him to stop being foolish, but quickly, the boy makes a cut on his neck, commenting that he said he would think about it, so he should just wait. Everyone begins to be shocked seeing this kind of situation. Perplexed, the kid asks if they don't understand what he is saying. Then he decides to open the truck door. Cheerfully, he calls for the man and asks if he could take them to the South. He ended up defeating all of his comrades, so he tells the man that he has a feeling the South will be a better place for him. At the same time, back at the warehouse, an old man is lying on the ground, telling the major not to do this, questioning why he is doing this to his own comrades. At 3:30 in the morning, the special operations instructor and all other personnel were killed by Lin. At 3:55, after Lin's action, an infiltrated agent intervened. Seeing the mask, the old Hote asks who he is. After that, Lin has been referred to as Iron Weasel and was designated as a monitoring management target. This report was made by Bake, and he was an infiltrator. Now back to the present. With the knife pointed at the kid's neck, Bake says that his skills are impressive, and that those skills could only have been learned in the north. Surprised, the boy asks where he learned that. Then Lin asks if he came from the north to kill him and says he feels like he's heard someone say that before, but Bake says that he told him he would keep an eye on him. Arguing, Lin asks if he's not here to kill him, why he's here. Responding, Bake says he came to make a deal. Opening the package of his favorite candy, the boy starts to listen, saying that's his favorite word, so he should hurry up. Meanwhile, at the Red Crown Jurang's hotel, a bottle of wine is thrown at one of the staff's heads while the leader asks if he thinks this is acceptable. While in the bath, he says that 3 of his hotels were forced to suspend business and his staff member apologizes. Turning around, he comments that the district office said they don't know what's going on, and in response, the boss starts to laugh. Very irritated, he comments that he should have gone and tried to find out for himself, questioning how he can simply yield to them like this. With his hair pulled, the man apologizes and says that they just told him it was ordered by a superior. Preparing to hit him, Hill tells him to find out who ordered it, and in the background, one of his other subordinates calls for the director, informing him that Hammond Hook Loans was eliminated by Taishan. Perplexed by the news, he asks if he's saying that this is their doing. Fixing his hair, he tells him to call his men and that they are going to Taishan right now. Someone hooded is sitting in the chair, saying that they aren't even trying to hide the fact that they are gangsters walking together like this. One of the men asks what he just said. Hill is also surprised to see who it is. Smiling, the boy apologizes, saying he might have gone overboard and that it's better to start with the left hand from now on. Suddenly, the fist approaches his face, leaving him speechless. Hill seemingly lands a punch straight on his face. He comments if he's getting rusty. He says that more people seem to be blocking his associates lately, and Jang appears, apologizing. With a cigarette in hand, he says his boys can be a little rude, that they analyze, and it seems there are some problems with his hotels. He says that if he can do them a few favors, he thinks they can understand, so he asks if he can sit down. Laughing, Hill asks who this old man is. Pulling the chair, he says that the one who forced his hotels to suspend their business wasn't Taishan, but rather them. And about his favor, he asks what it could be. Sitting with a maniacal smile, he comments that the only favor he needs from him now is to leave this place alive. After hearing this response, the man with white hair begins to laugh uncontrollably and says he can't get used to these gangsters, commenting that this way he will end up killing himself. Annoyed, Hill says they are from Gurang and how he dares to do this, so Jang calls the boy's attention. Taking off his glasses, he asks them to calm down and says that if he refuses to do this favor, he'll end up crying and begging for mercy. Then he asks if that's clear to him. Wolves are the apex predators among canines, smaller than predators like bears, but the origin of how they became the apex predator is different from others. They hunt and live in packs, and they have one that commands the entire pack, a charismatic being that represents the pack. This wolf is the ruler and is called the Alpha. In a very similar manner, there is also a large group called Gurang, where the leader is Rivtai Riavi. Pointing his cigarette, he calls him a bastard and laughs about what he said regarding begging. Hideng asks what's up with the boy, saying that the river trades and the industrial hotel in Ryotsun seem to be keeping him very busy. However, either way, they're still just a gang. Pulling out a gun from his coat, he asks if it's right for a hunter with a gun to come to Gurang. Along with several men, he says that they are different from them, amateurs, and that they are indeed professionals. Irritated, Ryu asks what he's talking about and questions if he wants a war after all. Explaining with a cigarette in his mouth, he says that what he's saying is that instead of aggravating the situation, they prefer to negotiate, that's all. Looking at the clipboard, the man gets irritated, saying he doesn't want to negotiate and asks what this is. Then he stays silent and shows the proposal, asking if they are really making a proposal, which is too good to be true. Questioning why they would do something so good for him, since if anything goes wrong, it's them who will die and won't lose anything. How should they trust him? Adjusting his glasses, Xiang says that he had explained it's a business deal and that they will provide all the personnel, all professionals. In response, the boy starts to tear up the proposal, saying he doesn't care about being pro this or pro that. Smiling, he says that they need trust to negotiate and that before anything else, they'll see how good his professionals are. Meanwhile, the protagonist, Xiang, is holding the phone shouting, "My God." He says that it's been a while since they should have been at the location. With the phone in hand, he asks the director what they should do. Responding, the protagonist checks if he is listening. He comments that for now, he should wait and see if he responds and that he's already made contact with the Iron Weasel, so they are taking action. Surprised, Lee asks if the weasel is causing some kind of trouble. Then they both approach 2 men who ask them to stay still. On the other side of the line, Lee asks if this guy is really useful. The men ask who let them in. At that moment, the boy appears behind them. He explains that if they don't want to die, they must press their necks hard. Quickly, he pulls the line he had placed around their necks and finishes them off completely. Then Lee asks if this boy isn't actually too young. Changing the subject, Bake asks about the guide who said he would get in touch. He asks if he's also useful. Then a blade approaches his face. Stuttering, the man calls him a bastard and tries to hit him, but Bake manages to dodge. After dodging the strike, he grabs the man by the wrist. Quickly, he manages to break it, leaving him on the ground. Stepping on his head, he begins to intimidate everyone in front of him. Responding on the other side of the line, Lai says he's enjoying everything here too, and that he'll be surprised when he sees him. He tells his boss that he wasn't moving to North Crow when he was dispatched to the army of ways in the Middle East. And that, aside from not being able to learn English there, he says he already expected that. Continuing the conversation, the blonde asks if he knows what's even funnier and comments that he just rides his motorcycle around. Then he asks if the boss is really listening. He mentions that among them, the guy with the deadline is a big shot, and that if you give money to this person, he'll do whatever you command. That's why he's called the messenger. While finishing off his opponent, the protagonist begins to pay attention to the conversation about the messenger. On the other side of the line, Lai comments that he'll do anything as long as he gets paid. In the middle of the battle, Lai comments that there are many of these guys and asks what they should do. Yisu says they should keep going, that they don't want to get involved with Gyurang's people anymore. Now that they have a pro, they will destroy as many affiliated organizations as they can. Continuing the conversation, the blonde says the guerrilla is spreading and that it will end here if he joins the boss. Then Bake tells him to be quick. Someone throws a hatchet in his direction, but he quickly manages to catch it by the handle. He says that by the looks of it, they were quicker than they thought. The man who threw the hatchet is very surprised that he managed to catch it so easily. He asks if these are the guys from the Ryuko investigation agency and questions how they dared to come after Jurang. This is the Ashi Knight from the Jurang-affiliated organization named Kim Ashi. Beck orders the Iron Weasel to get rid of them since they are just amateurs. Charging forward with the candy in his mouth, he says that since they are just amateurs, he will take care of them quickly. The subordinates rush forward, charging at the boy. They try to hit his face, but he manages to dodge, causing only the candy to break. Wondering how that startled him, he realizes that these guys are actually professionals. Especially the man notices that this is military training. He wonders if Jurang's people have guys like them on their side. Somewhat scared, the man asks what they think and explains that the Jurang boss, Ryu, personally selected them. He also heard that they were trained somewhere and that their skills are different, and he was surprised when he saw them. Guys like these should have already arrived in tension, and they are the only ones who think their organization's partners will be wiped out when they return. Then he asks what they think about this and if they are afraid. Meanwhile, Big thinks that Chief Jang intervened through 1-5 and asks if he lured Jurang. In the background, the boy replies double, saying to give double, and that if they are professionals, he will charge double. Jumping, he comments that he wasn't curious about them before, but now he needs to see for himself. He explains that he is a North Korean spy, but he wonders if he will come out alive against these professional guys. Then he charges at one of them, heading toward the armed man to take his knife. With his left hand, he manages to twist the blade, while with his right hand, he presses the opponent's wrist, delivering a full strike to his face, leaving him disarmed. As he sees his comrade fall, the other gets ready to defend himself. He charges forward, but he can't even dodge, delivering a fatal blow using 2 knives, one in each hand. He comments that he cleared the path and asks if the boy wasn't in a hurry. He states that he will take care of the rest and then leaves, saying he will leave them to him. Seeing all this carnage, the man begins to feel very frightened. Meanwhile, the protagonist starts running, thinking that the chief of Anki is now affiliated with Jurang and questioning how this happened so quickly. With the shelf in hand, Hugh says that it looks like he's useful and that he will follow the orders of callers like them. Then Jang argues, asking if the boy knows why they are professionals. Pike mainly thinks that if they aren't paid, they won't work. That's why it doesn't matter who gives the orders as long as they pay. Suddenly, someone on a motorcycle with a crowbar approaches the hero, thinking that he's the pro among pros. Several men are outside a building, holding knives. Suddenly, a car arrives at the location. The one with white hair says he still doesn't understand why they have to get involved with gang business. He says he's sure he killed Bake and Sue. Then he asks why he's there and questions if he's still alive. Jang says he should have made sure he was really dead. Looking back, he says that if he had brought his body, at least none of this would be happening now. Hearing this, the boy is in complete shock. He comments that if it's true, he really should have brought it. Irritated, he wonders why he didn't think of that earlier. With a very maniacal look, he starts laughing and says he really should have brought the body, and that he should have foreseen this kind of thing. Very focused, the lieutenant tells them to finish this quickly. He questions if Bake and Sue don't agree with this. Back to the present, the motorcyclist is wielding the red crowbar. He tries to hit the protagonist, who manages to dodge. Observing the man, the protagonist wonders if this is Deadline and if Cheyenne couldn't manage to meet him. Then he considers the possibility that the gang leader might have already done this. Soon everything became very complicated. The motorcyclist continues charging at the hero. The lieutenant thinks that variables keep appearing all the time. In the Middle East, in the country of Afghanistan, the most dangerous war zones in the desert, the vast desert and the sand dunes. To navigate this environment, Battalion 66 then created Special Forces. This is SOCAL, a Special Operations Command of the United States Armed Forces. Battalion 66 of the Special Forces. Someone on the Octok is saying, Romeo 3, Sector Alpha is clear. We also recovered some weapons and gunpowder. One of the American soldiers talks about all the Allied forces' equipment and questions where they got it from. Even in a place like this, there were variables. So to survive these variables, they had to fight to actually survive. One of the men goes to a common house and starts knocking on the door. There was a group of extremists trying to go further amidst the chaos. Additionally, there were greedy corporations that used them for their own interests. This way of life was very unstable. This was the most dangerous war zone there was. And if you couldn't handle all these variables, you would end up becoming a mere victim of them. Several armed men are gathered. A light catches the attention of one of them. It's the same motorcyclist charging in with his crowbar, hitting one of the men squarely on the head. Seeing such a strange thing, both men are stunned. When you are in the desert, Deadline was the peak of all predators. Seeing the bloodied man, the two men become frightened. Wasting no time, Deadline begins to accelerate his motorcycle, charging forward to slash through all the enemies. This man was the most feared of all. Back in the present, Bake is facing him, only armed with a knife, as the assassin approaches him. Analyzing the situation, he understands that he is holding the crowbar in his left hand, and with that, he aims at the opponent's weak spot. The motorcycle's light goes off. In this case, when you move from a dark place to a bright one or vice versa, your eyes slowly start to adjust to the new environment. And that's what Bake begins to do. Adjust his vision. Then he realizes that his vision is blurry. He questions if that's why he kept pointing the helmet's glare at him. Suddenly, he senses something coming. It's a blow with the crowbar directly at the protagonist's knife. It breaks in half and also injures his arm. He starts holding his injured arm, while in the background, the assassin is still there. Irritated, the hero starts glaring at him, while Deadline calmly goes about his work. Meanwhile, inside the building, a bald man yells for them to hold their ground. It's a frantic fight between everyone. One of them says, "Why did this happen now?" Just when the director is away, and he questions the leader-rank relationship. Then the muscular man says they can't reach the leader at the moment. The fight seems very frantic and bloody. In the background, the man with glasses says he really doesn't understand Chief Jang, and he asks why he has so much interest in these bandits. One of the men warns everyone not to let their guard down. Suddenly, something is approaching his face. The man with glasses throws a punch straight to the man's face, knocking him down. He falls hard to the ground, completely bruised. Looking back, he tells them to get it done quickly and calls them stupid gangsters. He then orders his subordinates to finish all of them. One of them says to kill all those bastards, but a fist approaches his face. It's the old man delivering a violent punch straight to his face, knocking him to the ground. Leaving the guy's mouth bloody, he says he wanted to enjoy his vacation. But since Jin Wong asked for his help, he couldn't say no. The people around realize it's the 9 knives and wonder why Choi is there. The leader with glasses starts thinking about the 9 knives. The old man notices his presence and says that he doesn't seem like one of them. He comments that it's a shame they meet this way, which leaves the man very confused. He begins to unbutton his coat, saying that just for today, he is on Taishin's side. Taking off his glasses, the opponent says they are bothersome. He calls him old man and asks if his son didn't send him money, and also questions why he's getting involved in the children's game. This is Park Chang-jun, former military police officer of the Special Forces, current leader of the 1CINC Special Operations Team. And he has a dishonorable discharge for violence and mutiny. These are the former dogs of Ilhak. They started an era of glory. He was Ilhak's sword, as well as his pride. However, now he fights for Taishin. In shock, one of the men asks why on earth Choi from Ilhak is siding with Taishin. Adjusting his glasses in the background, the man asks what is happening here. He questions if his son didn't send money and why he is involving himself in this children's game. Laughing, the old man responds that he doesn't seem to be one of theirs and that he lacks manners. Quickly, the opponent charges at the old man, landing a left hook on his face. Then he prepares to keep attacking. He goes all out against him, landing a heavy punch on his stomach. Holding the old man, he asks what he's talking about regarding manners. Irritated, he says they don't even know each other and questions why he should have good manners with him, calling him an old bastard. Meanwhile, the protagonist continues his clash with the motorcyclist. He wonders if his arm is really broken and comments that he spent too much time as he can't afford to stay here. At that moment, the motorcyclist starts preparing to fight more, charging full speed with his motorcycle towards the opponent. Back thinks it's a frontal attack with the motorcycle at high speed, so he aims at the bike's frame. Then he crouches down for the battle, and with the crowbar, the motorcyclist tries to strike him. Looking back, the protagonist begins to feel nervous. Deadline circles around with the motorcycle and charges again, once more with his crowbar in his left hand. Suddenly, he brakes with the front pedal. Leaning with the motorcycle, he gets closer to back, attempting to deliver another blow with his crowbar. This time, he lands a direct hit on the protagonist's head. His cap falls to the ground. With his head bleeding, he thinks this is the 5th time and that the variables keep changing. He thinks about Jang Kyurang's boss and even Deadline, and how these variables are making his entire plan fall apart. He then speaks to himself, telling himself to calm down and prepare for all this. So he decides to observe the opponent and act accordingly. Without hesitation, Deadline continues accelerating, charging at the hero without hesitation. Analyzing the situation, Bak wonders if he is creating smoke with the rear wheel, and he understands that this is making his vision completely obscured by the smoke. Realizing he can't see him and that an attack is coming, he wonders if he's coming from the left or if he's coming from the right where he's injured. All of this that he is thinking about is just variables. Variables are things that cannot be predicted or controlled by him. However, not all variables are necessarily negative by nature. Someone arrives at the location wondering if this is how a professional acts. Unbuttoning his coat, he says it doesn't seem like a professional way to act. It's people arriving at the scene and the protagonist wonders how he's here. Taking off his jacket, the muscular man asks what he thought of it and if he would like help from an amateur. Seeing this, the hero understands that a new variable has appeared, and it's not necessarily negative. Meanwhile, in the Taishan building, the enemy leader is there. While adjusting his neck, he calls the old man's attention. He comments that he's more resilient than he imagined. In his mind, he thinks about how a gangster's body endured that and that there's no reason to continue this. Deciding to finish him off for good, a fist approaches. In a reflex, the man manages to dodge. He realizes with speed that doesn't match his body and that it's not purely strength, so he decides to create some distance between them. However, the old man approaches very quickly and says that, to be honest, he's been feeling a bit down, ever since those government dogs tried to take over the gangster business. He then lands a massive punch on the man's stomach, sending him upward. At that moment, the old man continues, saying that it has been weighing on his mind. The man is very nervous as he grabs his belt. He takes out a knife and decides to protect himself. Without any fear, the old man delivers a direct punch to the man's head. After punching him with his right hand, he grabs him by the left hand. While covering his mouth, he asks if he really thought it would be that easy. He asks if he truly believes that by siding with those snakes, he could take them down. While the man is gagged by the old man's hand, he decides to grab another knife with his left hand. But quickly, the old man grabs the knife from his hand and says that he's right. He may not be the brightest. However, they always have a way of getting things done. Analyzing his enemy's attire, the man understands that the gloves are made of Kevlar, a synthetic fiber that is heat-resistant and 5 times stronger than steel. Continuing his explanation, the old man says that they fight for their family, friends, and the organization to protect them. He then decides to finish his opponent, slamming him to the ground. The guy's head is crushed, and he collapses. Smiling, the man asks if they didn't see it coming and that it's something very simple. Back to the protagonist, the cap is still lying on the ground. Jim asks if the boss's arm is broken or just dislocated. Bak responds that he's fine and asks about Taishan, but the muscular man tells him not to worry. He explains that Taishan currently has someone who cannot be defeated. He warns that this guy is a pro and not someone to be taken lightly. Then with his head, Jim questions who cares if he's a professional. He says that he should take care of this guy first. Yelling, the boy says not to face him without a plan. Then Jim asks why he cares about that. He says that all they need to do is take him down. Without making any difference if there's 1 or 2 people, Deadline charges forward again. With his coat wrapped around his arm, the muscular man talks about Director Bake and comments that his brother once told him something very important. At that moment, Deadline gets very close to his opponent. Recalling what Bake said about caring, without any fear, Jim charges forward with all his might, landing a punch straight into Deadline's motorcycle. The impact throws him off the bike. He crashes hard to the ground. Then the muscular man asks what he thought of that, and he comments that even if they sometimes use his brother's methods to solve things, this time at least they have to become equal to his brother. Now in a flashback, Bake and Yisu are only 11 years old, and he's crying while someone calls out to him. He mentions that everything started that day. Someone approaches asking if he's crying again. This is Bak Do-young, who asks if he didn't warn him that if he cried again, he'd hit him. Crying and stuttering, the boy says that those 6-year seniors keep hitting him. They are twins, but unlike him, his brother was the strongest of them all. At that time, he began to hate having a brother as strong as him. Someone shouts that Bak Do-young got into another fight on campus, and they go there to see. Watching from the windows, he begins to observe the seniors fight. One comments that he's still bleeding from the last fight and that if he bleeds, he loses. Another says that if he's crying, crying also means losing. This is Bak Do-young, 15 years old in Korong Middle School, 2nd year, class 4. From the top of the window, one of the students points, asking if that's Bak Do-young's group, and one of them says it's them. But he wonders why it looks like they've taken a serious beating. In the middle of them all is Bak Do-young, only 15 years old. One of the people says he can't believe it either, asking if the 3 came again to get beaten up, and they even brought one more. The senior says that with what they're doing, it seems like he was a really bad guy. In shock, stuttering, one of the students says he's a senior and asks if he's some kind of professional fighter. The senior begins facing Bak, who's 15 years old, head on. I gave some advice to your friends, but I don't think they took it seriously, and now they're all more hurt. He asks if they finally understood the message. Getting closer, the boy says that he's already graduated and become a high school student. With a look full of hatred, he asks why he's messing with middle schoolers and questions if he's stupid or needs him to make him understand. He asks him to follow him outside so there's no need for him to embarrass himself in front of the whole school. All his friends start to follow, but Bake raises his arm. telling them to stay out of it as he'll handle everything alone, saying that in their state, they'll only get in the way. Surprised, the students understand that he's going to face everything alone and that he's really brave. Sometime later, Bake is with his head pressed to the ground. Bowing, he sincerely apologizes, saying that he got so into the role that he didn't show the proper respect. One of the seniors asks what's up with this kid and why the sudden change. Raising his head, he comments that he heard he attended J High School and that he has great respect for him, calling him by name. He also mentions that he must be the boss there too. Nervous, the senior confirms, saying that's what he knows. Then the boy bows, saying that he's really amazing. Sunbain, the senior, comments that this guy is really being nice and that he's starting to like him. He adds that he was considering turning him into ground meat like he did with his friends. Smiling, he says he's in a good mood and will let him go, but instead, he'll beat up his friends and asks what he thinks. He comments that the proposal sounds like a bargain. Then the boy begins to sigh, saying that's awful, and that he thought he could make them leave by being nice. With just a pen, he stabs it straight into the bully's foot. The bully jumps, feeling immense pain in his foot. Then the boy kicks his face, telling him he talks too much and calling him a bastard. He comments that every day Jihang delivers newspapers in the neighborhood, and because of that, he always teased him for delivering newspapers the old-fashioned way. But apparently, he does it to help his sister. However, until they broke the boy's left foot, one of them charges at him, asking what he's talking about, trying to punch him, but the boy manages to dodge. Then he starts talking about Jihang, who recently started a new hobby. While embracing Jihang, he explains that he began helping his mother make kimbap since she has a kimbap shop, and that he always brought kimbap with open edges, but that no longer happens as he can't make it anymore. Looking up, he says he wished Jihang would introduce his sister so they could eat together. Meanwhile, all the bullies rush at the boy. One of them grabs his torso and another his right arm, while the third gets ready to punch, managing to land a full hit on his face. However, after that, counterattacking, Bake grabs the bully by the hair. Headbutting him hard, he asks why they had to open their heads. Feeling the pain in his head, he says it must have hurt even more for one of his friends, and he yells for everyone to come at him together. Showing the middle finger, Xing is known for saying that anyone who wants a piece of him can come at him and he'll take them all down. In his mind, Bake comments that he hated his brother who lived so recklessly, and that his brother could do what he couldn't. Suddenly, this happens as he kicks one of the bullies in the face, surprising his brother Bake a lot. In his mind, the boy says he felt very jealous of that. He felt jealous of his brother who would be like him. One of the bullies sees them both and wonders why there are two backs there. Doyang asks why his brother came. He starts responding. He explains that he's not doing well in his studies anyway, and no matter how much he tries, he can't understand anything. Smiling, his brother says he's a damn fool. Then he asks if he's not going to study, what he's going to do. He questions if he knows what he's going to do. Responding, he says not to worry because his brother is going to start a business and doesn't know what kind yet, but he'll make him the president. The other looks shocked and asks if he's serious. Then back in the present, the protagonist understands that even now he wanted to be like his brother. Returning to the fight, Deadline starts skidding on the ground, and he falls completely down. With his arm injured, the hero approaches Jin, asking what he should do now. He comments that he thought he could become like Bak Doyang, his brother, but it seems he's still far from that. He continues saying that at the moment he doesn't know what kind of person his brother has become. He asks what kind of person his brother was to Director Ha and if he really thinks he can become like him. Breaking the silence, the muscular man says he's going to answer about what kind of person his brother was. Then he says he's going to make him the same, becoming the symbol of Taishan. Meanwhile, somewhere else, the old man is cleaning his hands. Stretching, he says he can see their mural below, and then it's almost over here. He then comments that he's too old for this, and that maybe he should retire soon. And the image of Mr. Dalehack appears. But the old man thinks that maybe it's a bit too early for that kind of thing. Clenching his fists, he tells them to come, that the rest of them can come right now. He says that young men like them shouldn't be so cowardly. At that moment, someone appears behind the old man with a dagger. Getting up, Jin asks how it's possible that Deadline is still standing after that. He wonders who he is, then the hero says he's asking that after throwing him far away. But Jin responds that he only did it because he was coming their way and questions if he's one of the pro-friends. Back responds that he's not and that the only information is that he was part of the US Army. A motorcyclist calls him a bastard, saying they did this to his headlight and asks what they're going to do about it. Looking at the director, Jin says he didn't mention that he was from the US Army, but he speaks Korean. Then the hero says that apparently he has a lot of questions today. While they talk, the motorcyclist spins his crowbar. The muscular man says that either way he won't need to hold back at all. The motorcyclist continues revving his bike. He's very focused on this fight. With his right hand, he grabs his phone. He sees the message that his payment has been received, and below it, there's a message telling him to go to the address below, and as soon as he finishes the job, the rest of the payment will be sent. Seeing this situation, Jin starts to feel confused. Then Deadline points at the muscular man, saying that he's the one who broke the headlight and that he'll really remember him. Watching the motorcyclist leave, Jin comments that he thought he wanted to finish the fight. Vic comments that this man works for money and can never imagine him fulfilling his objective, or that he ended up getting a job that pays even more. Meanwhile, in that Taishan building, the place was still very quiet, but even the organization's subordinates and veterans could feel that this wasn't a fight they could interfere in. As he punches, the old man thinks that this guy isn't normal and that if he lets his guard down, he might end up losing. But he is certain that he's feeling his punches and needs to take advantage of this chance to finish him. So he decides to charge forward and punch him again. Laughing like a madman, he says that won't be enough and calls him Grandpa. Seeing his opponent's calm demeanor, the old man is shocked, so he decides to take a pause. Counterattacking, the man rushes in, delivering multiple blade strikes. In his mind, the old man thinks he's fast and barely managed to block his vital points. As soon as he blocked the attacks, the man targeted the opening created in his back, making a cut. He then questions where this kind of guy came from. He comments that he misjudged him and that it's not just his guard he should worry about. Laughing and swinging the blades wildly, the man with white hair says he wants even more. Completely changing his expression, he says he wants his back even more. Then he starts laughing more and more, and that's what Baek Yisu said before he could finish him off. This is the second knife Choi charging forward. He tries to land a blow, but the man with white hair dodges and comments that in this way he wants more. The old man doesn't stop but tries another attack, which is again dodged. He ends up reflecting to himself, realizing that he can't hold back against this opponent. However, the captain of the Nine Knives of Ilhak thought to himself that they wouldn't lose as long as they had something to protect. The old man tries to strike the man with white hair, but he manages to immobilize him and asks if that's all he's got, calling him grandpa and pathetic. After saying that, he continues laughing more and more. Seeing this madness, the old man becomes increasingly irritated. Counterattacking again, the boy delivers a knee strike. Someone yells for everyone to withdraw, making the boy stop his attack. Then, over the radio, he tells all personnel to withdraw immediately. The boy asks where everyone is going. His leader approaches him and says that the guys from here in the Orang changed their plans and that they were ordered to withdraw. Completely battered, he says that it seems there was a setback in the plan, and that's why they need to retreat immediately. He explains that they must return now and follow the boss's orders. Then the boy grabs the man by the hair, questioning the retreat. Getting closer to him, he asks if he looks like an ordinary person and questions why he keeps talking about retreat, saying it's starting to irritate him. He comments that besides, why should they leave when the fun was just beginning? Speaking to the boss, he tries to argue and says it's nonsense, and that he's staying here to bring back Yisu's body. In response, the boss tells him to stop with the nonsense and regroup with them. Shine, who is actually the boss, says that their almighty president has a plan. Then Ryu says that was rude, considering he's right there. But he comments that he should look at the bigger picture and mentions that he also hates Taishan, but asks if he really thinks all the problems will end just by eliminating Taishan. With a sinister look, he says that in a situation like this, they need to handle it the gangster way. Elsewhere, Lin is eating his favorite candy. He wonders how he can use the tie and asks the blonde guy for help. The blonde responds, telling the ferret to come here now. While adjusting the tie, the boy asks who the ferret is and the guy responds that it's a super cool and very strong animal. The kid replies that it's okay then, and that he'll call himself Ferret from now on. Looking to the side, the blonde guy tells Boris to put down the knife and that he doesn't know what to do with this bald guy anymore. Suddenly, someone enters the room. The old man and Jin look to the side. The protagonist, walking in with a girl, says that they're better than animals, better than he imagined. Walking with the girl, he says that now they really look like true gangsters. He comments that from now on, they need to discuss this like gangsters. Then he asks where he needs to start. Outside, the old man comments that after all the help he gave, they're sending him home. Shin explains that that's not what the director meant by go whenever you want. Then the man with the broken arm says it's a joke, and that he was already wishing to go back anyway since he's tired of the food here. Jin then says he wanted to ask and questions if he could stay in Taishan just a little longer. The old man brings his hand closer to his arm and says he knows why. However, seeing how Taishan is now, a thought crosses his mind. That it's not too late for all of them and that the island can rise again. So he says he must now return to his home in the capital island. There the bald man asks if they know who they're messing with. This is Dajiku, the fourth knife. After the massacre, he asks if they think the Nine Knives will fall that easily. One of his red-haired colleagues is on the ground. Observing the situation, he asks who sent these two. It's Deadline and that crazy guy with white hair. Ryu approaches, saying that he's aged a lot since the last time they saw each other. Looking down at him, he comments that it's been a long time and calls him a veteran. Recalling the building in the capital island, someone mentions the month's earnings. The CEO says it's much less than last month and his subordinate comments that he's very embarrassed. Then Lee says it's not that and that it's all his fault for being too careless. However, he adds that what's most important isn't that right now, and he asks if they're feeling okay. Laughing, the red-haired man with a broken leg says yes, and that it's nothing. The other comments that he feels much better, but he can't say the same for his colleague. The CEO says they did well despite being a boss who doesn't know how to fight. This is the ninth knife, Lee, who says he's going to check what's going on outside. Arriving there, he asks what all the commotion is and says he needs to be updated on the situation. One of the men comments that apparently the fool was downstairs, and another wonders if it doesn't sound like a motorcycle, but this is the 3rd floor. So they decide to look outside. Out of nowhere, a motorcyclist appears carrying a crowbar, and he's heading straight for the 3 of them. After that, he bursts into the meeting room on his motorcycle, catching the attention of the knives. He charges forward with his motorcycle and crowbar, striking one of them directly on the head. The 9 knives have never been caught off guard. Furthermore, all of them are veterans who have participated in numerous battles. Just like a veteran boxer, always ready for anything, using his skill and experience, they fight according to their enemy. However, an unknown opponent appeared, one they never expected, and he stepped into the ring. For the 9 knives, this unexpected arrival caused them to hesitate, and for Deadline, it became his greatest advantage. He charges at another knife. The target manages to defend himself, but thinks that his wounds are still not healed. Suddenly, several people start entering the room. Looking at the badge, one of them begins to understand who has entered. He questions if they are from Gureng, saying that this is a direct violation of the agreement. He asks if they want to go against the committee or if they're enemies. One of the veteran men asks what they're talking about, and another tells them to finish them off quickly. The one with the injured leg removes his prosthetic entirely and goes all out to fight, calling them damned insects. He shouts, asking who they think they're messing with, and says he will take them all down. This is the 7th knife Choi. However, as he steps on the ground, he realizes it's still very painful. The bald man with glasses understands that Dog One's wounds are still severe, and that, in the worst case, he'll have to deal with the biker himself. Meanwhile, the biker charges forward, ramming his bike into one of the knives who has a broken arm. Acting very quickly, the bald man with glasses manages to save his colleague. He then orders Song Mong to go protect the young master while they try to hold off these people as long as they can. Following the order, the man tells Jung Gil not to be left alone. One of the knives appears behind Deadline, saying that he won't be alone. Injured, he tells Jung Gil that this is his chance. This is the 8th knife, Jang Diokba. Noticing the man, Deadline's attention is drawn. This is the 4th knife, Du Gaiku, charges forward with Deadline's pipe and lands a blow on the biker's helmet. He then shouts for everyone to go, saying that the young master is the priority and telling them to let him fight as well. One of the men is thrown to the ground with a pipe. Song Mong tells Jiang Pao to handle it, and Okuepo says he will. In the background, Sul yells about the 9 knives, telling them to stay as well. He continues shouting as if he's ready to fight too. His subordinate takes the young master to the car, and the young master asks what they're doing, saying they need to join the fight. However, his subordinate explains that if Gureng has started mobilizing, it means they are in danger. Perplexed, Lai says that's exactly why he wants to stay, and that it's a shame to have to retreat. Arguing, the man says that if the young master dies, they will lose everything they are. Shocked, the young master asks if he really wants him to survive, no matter what, even if it means everyone else will die. Back in the room, Hugh says that this is how Ilhak will fall, and that it's not as exciting as he imagined. He then asks where the young master ended up running off to. Inside the car, the young master is in the back seat. He asks the driver what the advantage is of him surviving alone. He comments that he tried his best to rebuild Ilhak from the ashes, but in the end, it was destroyed under his care. In the front seat, driving, one of his subordinates calls him young master, and he reacts negatively, telling him not to call him that. He grumbles about how long he's going to remain the young master, saying he's not the head of Ilhak. But his subordinates say that's not what they meant. Suddenly, Deadline appears in front of them, throwing a chain on the ground. It's a set of iron spikes designed to puncture the car tires. Realizing what it is, the driver tries to swerve quickly. However, the road is wet, making it very difficult. He ends up injuring himself a bit in the process. He asks what that was, and the driver says that's as far as he can go with him. He then begins to open his door. Facing his master, he says that as for the place he needs to go, he believes the young master already knows where it is. This is Lee Sung-mong, the 6th knife of Ilhak capital, who stands silently watching his master. He then comments that there's something the young master must know. He is their leader, President Sun Min. And their group, the 9 knives, is the sword of Ilhak. Just like his sword, young master. Sung Min runs through the rain and collapses to the ground in front of everyone. No matter how miserable he looks, in the end he represents Ilhak. The man continues to say that if it's for his sake, there's nothing they wouldn't do. In the rain, Sung Min appears in front of the corporation. He then catches the attention of the old man and the protagonist Jin. He is completely battered, calling out for Bake. The gray-haired man is shocked and calls out to his young master. The hero then asks where he came from and says that his current state leaves him stunned. He only understands that he needs to seek help from Taishan. Then the CEO of Ilhak Capital begins to plead. He realizes that he needs to do this to save Ilhak. Staggering, he says he must save it and pleads for kindness. He thinks he needs to be as pitiful as necessary. The hero approaches to stop him from falling. He asks if he slipped and tells him to be careful. He then invites him inside, saying he's soaking wet. Seeing this gesture of kindness, the boy is surprised. Stuttering, he says he's fine and begins to explain about the 9 knives and Buring. But the hero asks him to explain slowly and questions why he is in such a rush. He comments that there's something more important at the moment, and that they were discussing something interesting, but they couldn't decide. He informs him that they're going to decide the committee, but they haven't decided where to start. He then asks where they should begin with this plan, or if they should just go straight to attack Buring. Meanwhile, somewhere else. Inside some kind of hospital room, the girl is looking at someone lying on the stretcher. By the tattoo, it appears to be the protagonist's older brother. In another place, on a very busy day, someone comments that they've already said not to smoke in the area. This old man smoking is the president of a hockey group. Lee Sung-gar and the target is from Seoul. The old man comments about smoking, saying that there's no one smoking. He then asks if someone else is smoking there. The young man says he doesn't believe it. He says he's sure he told him he'd bury him if he caught him smoking again. One of the men appears behind him, stammering, saying he shouldn't say such things. This is actually Lee Sung-min at 8 years old, the hair of the place. The grandfather begins to explain that he won't smoke anymore. He then asks his grandson to lower the sword. He asks who taught his little Sung-min to talk like that, and the grandson responds that it was Uncle Siu and Ho. He says that if he talks like that, no one will mess with him. Then the old man asks if it was really his uncle who taught him that. Smiling, the grandson comments that his grandpa is really good at fighting, and the old man says that he's not that great at fighting. Lee starts pulling his grandfather, saying that he's the strongest in Seoul, and he asks how he couldn't be good at fighting. Responding, the old man says he's telling the truth, that he can't fight. However, he bets that his grandson is good at it. Excited, the boy asks if his grandpa isn't the best. Then who is? Could it be his uncle? Standing up, the old man says no. He says grandpa is the best, and that you should know that being the best doesn't mean being good at fighting, but rather having a strong spirit, because it should never bow down to others. Hearing this, the boy remains silent. He comments that he's so old-fashioned, so grandpa must be weak, and the old man starts laughing a lot. Grandpa then asks Xiang Yu what he didn't teach Xiang Min. The man responds that it's Xiang Min's fault. The center of the island in Seoul was founded by President Lee Sung-gak. The island here and his grandfather were like dreams to Lee. Yes, they were indeed dreams. The old man arrives, calling the young master, asking if he's okay. He only thinks that it's just like dreams, and that they shatter sooner or later. Crying, Lee comments that the island here has indeed fallen. Then everyone gathers and the protagonist starts speaking. He asks how he's feeling. Smiling, the old man says that thanks to the director, he's feeling much better. And the hero says that's great. He mentions that they are in their debt, so he can feel free to rest as much as he wants. Laughing, the old man says there's no debt and that they were just helping each other. Then Baek begins to understand this concept of helping each other, and he says he was wondering something, if the island here can help them. Then the old man responds yes, and that if it's for Taishan, they'll do anything. Grabbing the kettle, he catches Mr. Choi's attention, and he says he was asking the head of the island here. He questions if he suddenly became the boss. This response leaves the old man silent. Then Lee says he should wait outside. He then asks to speak with President Bai privately. At this moment, both Jin and the old man leave the room. Starting to speak, Lee says that even though he said he wanted to speak with him, he also wants to ask something. He asks if Bai is indeed the leader of Taishan. He questions where his brother is. Placing the cup on the floor, the hero calls Lee by his name. He says that even knowing this, he called him Bai Doyang, and that it seems he didn't tell Choi about him. Subman comments that he could see he was trying to hide it, so he did his part. The protagonist then asks if he was afraid, perhaps realizing it was something he truly couldn't handle. He continues, saying that if that's the case, he should continue being afraid, because instead of trying, he's testing himself just like he is now. Sweating nervously, Lee wonders if he overstepped by asking, so he decides for now to act friendly with Taishan. Changing the subject, he says they should now talk business and asks if they will work with Ilhaki again. Sipping his tea, the boy responds no, adding that the current Ilhaki is still not desirable, as it is too weak. He then addresses the question, asking if Ilhaki will help them. He comments that he doesn't want his opinion, but rather how they can help. At that moment, Sihun begins to ask about the only way the current Ilhaki can assist. Pouring more tea, Baek states that Taishan claims it will fight against Gyurang and the committee, but Taishan questions whether it can truly do it alone, since Ilhaki is still associated with the committee. However, Gyurang attacked them and violated the agreement. Thus, if the leader of Ilhaki notifies the committee about this, Gyurang will have to pay the price for this violation. He admits that the current Ilhaki is weak, but it has its closeness. He clarifies that this isn't what he meant when he called Ilhaki weak. He affirms that in his opinion, the weak one is Mr. Lee Sung-min. In other words, the person in front of him. He asks if they will truly recognize him as their leader without the 9 knives by his side. The next day, at the entrance of the HHS entertainment office, someone says the place is very fancy. Ryu says that maybe he should have invested in an office like this instead of a hotel. The blonde tells him to stop stalling and asks how he plans to clean up the mess. He questions why he attacked Ilhaki first. In response, Ryu says he attacked them first because he wanted to. Hen comments that he's always been a problem since he was young, and that it was foolish to think he had improved. He says he can't stand by his side this time because his antics have gone too far. But Ryu explains that it's all part of his plan and that he should just wait for the next committee meeting. The blonde then says he hopes this isn't just to provoke Lee. At that moment, the man starts laughing uncontrollably and asks if he's the least wise about the location of the next meeting. He reveals that it's a very special place for the young master. The location of the next meeting will be at Sungmin's grandfather's house. Standing in front of his grandfather's house, furious, Sungmin questions if Ryu had to go that far. A bald man says that this isn't a place where people can come and go freely. Another asks if he knows who he thinks he is. Another comments that he might seem a bit familiar, or perhaps it's his imagination. One of the bald men continues laughing. Recalling the night before when the protagonist was talking to Ryu Sungmin, he mentioned the 9 knives being by his side and how he's a young master of a declining group, stating that he shouldn't walk a path created by the 9 knives. Back in the present, one of the people asks if he isn't the young master of Ilhaki. Another says that our dear young master has come to conduct important business. Looking at the situation, Lee thinks he must show that he's worthy of being the leader of Ilhaki. One of the men throws a cigarette directly onto his suit, staining it. And the boy alone thinks that just as the 9 knives did their best to prove he's worthy, he must do the same. Another person apologizes. Staring at him is Jangman Sul-ki from the Gairang group, the associate supervising director. He mentions that there's a committee meeting happening right now. Only the 4 leaders of the largest groups are allowed to participate. Irritated, the boy tells him to move aside. Preparing for a strike, he repeats that he needs to get out of the way now, calling him a damn fat pig. Seeing the situation, one of the people asks what's going on. Another questions why he came through the front entrance. Lee easily defeated the security guards. As he enters, he suddenly sees someone holding a bat and calling him a bastard. Charging forward, he lands a headbutt with all his strength. He then remembers his grandfather's words about how it's okay not to be able to fight, but that regardless, he needs to have a strong spirit, because he should never bow his head to others in front of his family. After taking the hit, he tries to recover instantly. Counterattacking, he grabs the man by the neck and begins to choke him with enough force to make his body tremble. Quickly, he breaks the man's neck, and the person behind him, holding a knife, asks what kind of lunatic he is. Behind him, the blonde is pushing a shopping cart. He comments that things have already gone too far. Then he lands a knife strike directly on the man's head. Removing his cap, he says that background characters like him should know when to stay out of the situation, because this meeting is only for the bosses. After entering the meeting room, Ryu asks if they should start the meeting, believing there must be a lot to discuss. Arms crossed, the girl questions if they aren't going to start only when Ilhak arrives, and that he should be smarter considering the sole reason for this meeting. Smiling, the man says Ilhak isn't coming this time. He wonders who won't be able to attend the next meeting. The woman asks if Gyurang should really be acting like this, and suddenly, he appears in the background. Everyone quickly looks at him. Injured, he begins to call out for Ryu Tahijun. He comments that apparently no one told him that smoking is not allowed in this place, calling him a bastard. Approaching him, he takes the cigarette and says he'll tell the owner of this building from years ago that if he smokes here, they'll bury him. And he calls him a nobody. In the glory days, the alpha of Seoul, Lee Seol-gang, was the president of the Ilhak group. During the dark times, Ilhak ruled everything and Lee was the king. Lee dreamed of meddling in politics but ultimately failed in this objective. As a result, Ilhak began to crumble and everyone started fighting for control over the organization's businesses. With all this happening, a full-scale war between the 9 knives of Ilhak and Seoul's organization began. Thus, the dark side of Seoul became a bloodbath. However, at a certain point, this war came to an end. President Lee, who could no longer watch everything worsen day after day without doing anything, made a choice that ended the war. The business rights were divided into 4, like a pair of hands and feet. He then acknowledged the leaders of the organizations that gained those rights as bosses. Removing the woman's glasses, he explains that this is how the Committee of the Big Four of Seoul was born. He explains that even so, Ryu ignored President Lee's wishes, disregarded the committee, and attacked Ilhak. Even if he says Ilhak isn't coming this time, this isn't something they can let slide. He comments that if he fails to present something plausible, Huyorang will become an enemy of the committee. Taking a cigarette out of the box, Ryu says she acts as if she's the lady of the committee. He then comments that if she keeps talking like that, she might not make it to the next meeting either. Irritated, she asks how Gyurang can act like this. At that moment, Lee enters the meeting room, catching Ryu's attention. He comments that apparently no one told him anything. Taking the cigarette from his mouth, he says the same thing he told the owner of this building. He warns that if he smokes here, he'll bury him 6 feet under, calling him a nobody. After that, he takes a seat. He asks the man if he thinks this is his mother's house or something, and that on top of it all, he's infested the place with strays. Laughing, the man says that finally he's become a man, the young master Sungmin. Irritated, he says that he's finally acting like a man and asks if he made it so his days were numbered, if that's what changed him. Smiling, the boy thanks and says that he woke up after hitting his head really hard. The woman comments that since Ilhak is here, why doesn't he explain what happened? Then the boy says he will do it himself. Pointing to his face, he says that Ilhak was attacked by Gyurang, and that just a moment ago, outside, he was attacked by stray dogs again. He comments that the organization broke the rule that prohibits fights between committee members. Despite all this, the blonde remains silent. Continuing, the boy also says that they took Ilhak's properties and assets, and that this is a clear breach of the agreement. He states that, as the head of Ilhak, he demands that Joring be expelled from the committee and that their business rights be completely suspended. Then he asks Ryu if he has any objection to this. Smiling, he says he has no objection, that he is right, that he did all of that indeed. Most importantly, the man knew the young master would react this way. Showing a photo, he says that the same person mixed up the order of events and asks if it wasn't Ilhak who broke the committee rules first. He comments that he seems very close to Taishan and even gave them a gift. He questions if that's how he got Taishan to attack them. Seeing all this, the boy thinks that the files he gave Taishan are actually from OneSync and have nothing to do with Joring. Smiling, Ryu says that Taishan and Joring have been fighting over Hanan's disciple for a while. So probably he thought this would be his chance. When Taishan left the committee, then he questions if he's right. Not long after that, Ganchi Loans and other groups were also ambushed. He comments that Ilhak called an outside group to attack Joring, and this means they attacked first. With a sadistic look, he asks the boy if he's wrong. In his mind, he wonders how he will get out of this. Staring, he thinks that he probably won't get out of this because he won't reveal the existence of the OneSync files to everyone else on this committee. Continuing to speak, Ryu says he will clarify things, because he believes that the head of Ilhak, Lee Sung-min, should be responsible for all the committee's rule-breaking. With that, he ends up requesting the dissolution of this meaningless committee, and that this seems right after all, they are all gangsters. Going back to the past, Lee begins to remember what the protagonist said. The hero was explaining that Bonada and Joring tried to dissolve the committee, and that Joring knows Ilhak will rely on this committee. So if they'll think, now is my chance. Then he asks if there's no reason for him to attend the committee meeting. Answering, Bake says that he told him he needs to prove that he is a leader at the meeting. In other words, on the day of the meeting, all he needs to be is the head of Ilhak after all. Back in the present, the girl questions Ryu about what he's doing. With his hands in his pockets, Lee comments that he doesn't care, that the man can do whatever he wants. Han intervenes and says that Lee is being irrational. He asks if he's already giving up and why that instead of begging on his knees. Observing the situation, Lee questions if the two of them are conspiring, if he's on Joring's side. Putting on her glasses, she says that Joring and HHS made a mistake. She comments that the two of them chose the wrong day to start a war, because she didn't come to this meeting alone. So if they want to continue, they can go ahead, but she'll at least take one of their heads. Looking to the side, Lee understands that STF is under Zhang and wonders how she could be there since she barely knows she's going to be in China. Standing up, Ryu sarcastically says that he's very scared and asks her to forget it. Approaching, he questions Lee about Ilhak, asking if he no longer has the 9 knives and that they won't be able to escape today. He comments that he really shouldn't have tried to embrace the OneSync files all by himself. Smiling, the boy says he was right and that it was too much for him to try to handle all this alone. Suddenly, several people are walking through the lobby, heading towards the meeting room. At this moment, the protagonist calls out to Ryu. Smiling, he says they want to play. Upon arrival, he asks what this is, what's with this atmosphere, and questions if he ruined everything. He comments that it looks like he's the only one who's late here. Surprised, Rad questions Bak if he wasn't the one who said he wanted nothing to do with the committee and asks what made him think he could come crawling back. In response, the protagonist calls him an idiot and says that he himself stated that the committee's agreement no longer holds, so he asks what there is left to think about. A bit excited, the man says that's why the young master didn't fight to stay on the committee. That hurt a little, so he asks if they are that close. Answering, the boy says that they are indeed very close, because he is their president after all. Walking around the meeting room, he says that Taisho will not honor the last president of Ilhak's wish, and that this way, they will support Ilhak and appoint Lee Sung-min as the president of their organization. In other words, Joring can prepare themselves because they have decided to take them down first. And upon hearing this, Ryu begins to get irritated. At this, Bake asks both of them at the table to listen. He explains that they will have to make a choice, whether they will decide to honor Lee Sung-gak's wishes, or if they will go back to being delinquents pretending to be gangsters. Because staring, he says he can tell just by looking at their faces. Then Cha asks for subordinate not to attack. Leaving the meeting room and smiling, the protagonist suggests they leave now, calling Lee Sung-min president. Thus, Lee Sung-min becomes the president of Ilhak Capital, an organization affiliated with the Taishan group. As they leave, the hero asks if he's okay. Then Lee responds, asking if he looks okay and that the flame could have always come sooner. But Bake comments that a grand entrance with certainty is incredible, and doesn't he think so? At the beginning of the staircase, a man appears saying that it seems he arrived late. He then comments that it's his first time here, so he got lost. Turning around, the protagonist realizes who it is and is very surprised, feeling shocked. It's Jang, who adjusts his glasses and comments that it's been a while. Happily, he says that they finally meet, and this is Bak Doyeon. With a completely indescribable expression, the protagonist calls Mr. Jang by his name. Then the man says that thinking he would see him here is a big surprise. In the background, Lee is also surprised that the flame just spoke about Chef Jang, and only understands that this man is the one responsible for OneSync. Additionally, he is also responsible for everything that has happened so far. At this moment, he starts shouting Bak's name, who is already filled with rage, holding a knife. Staring at the man, he thinks that the distance between them is just over 2 meters, so killing him would take less than a few seconds, just as he did with his team in the past for the sake of his own personal and selfish goals. So he would hesitate to kill him right here, as that's how he taught them. At this moment, the protagonist moves toward the man, staring at him with a completely empty expression, and he only thinks that this cannot be called excitement. Then he starts to take a cigarette out of the pack, asking for a lighter, and the man says he has one. He leans forward to help him. Both of them are very close on the staircase. Jang comments that from what he heard, things got pretty noisy after the funeral. With the knife in hand, Bake responds that it was the same. Then he also asks if the problem was resolved. At this, Bake says he believes he knows who is responsible, but he cannot confirm yet. Staring at him, he says that seeing the whole path to him, he is certainly sure of who it was. With a terrifying expression, Jang asks what he plans to do with that information. The protagonist comments that if it were up to him, he would kill him here and now. However, this is not something that would end with Nakyuni's death. Hearing this, the man falls completely silent. As he leaves, the boy says that anyway, he will see him around, calling him boss. He explains that when they meet again, he will say what he plans to do. Then Jang starts watching the boy walk away. He says they will see each other again because he has a lot to ask about his new name. He says he's not entirely sure about something, but he has a hunch. The hero manages to hold on and wave goodbye to Boss Jang. At this moment, all of his colleagues begin to follow down the stairs. Both are certain, but they show nothing. Lee calls out to director Bake, and he tells them to go ahead. Holding the knife with intense anger, his hand trembling, he says they must go now. The next day, at Ganko Loans, the president of Ganko Loans is very irritated, asking why there are 46,001 missing. The bald man, scratching his head, says that it's about the woman from the fruit stall. Then his boss asks what's up with her, as she's a kind person. The man comments that he knows that, but her daughter is scary. A flashback shows the woman handing him a bag, telling him to take it and come back tomorrow. Remembering that, the boss understands that she is truly frightening. The subordinate says that in exchange he received a very sweet pastry. Worried, the boss tells him to just shut up for a moment, wondering how Gancho Loans has fallen so much and if it wasn't for that Russian sent by Taishan, and also for that blonde playboy who advised him to retire and keep his head down. He just thinks to himself to wait as he will manage to recover. Then suddenly, the blonde enters the establishment, asking if what he saw was a cockroach. Smiling, he says to the captain that it's been a long time and asks if he remembers him. The blonde doesn't understand what's happening, and the captain is in complete shock, beginning to tremble. Intimidating the bald man, he asks what a piece of trash like him is doing there. And then the captain in the back asks him not to do that. Quickly, the blonde gets angry and starts hitting the big guy. Seeing this scene, the captain begins to feel completely desperate and very scared. Sometime later, the boss asks what he wants him to tell about Joring. The blonde says yes, that he wants to know about the locations of their businesses. Trembling, the man asks if he doesn't already know the location of all the businesses and if they came and made a mess. Taking something, the blonde says that's what he thought, but apparently that wasn't the case because he's looking for something he seems unable to find. Curious, the captain asks what he's looking for. Changing his expression, the blonde replies that he's looking for some people who are searching for a place that hides 5 people. Rationally, the captain thinks if that rumor could be true, and that he heard Joring finished off Ilhak and kidnapped the 9 knives. Additionally, he also heard that the committee was dissolved. While the man realizes that this was probably true, then he questions him about it, asking if he knows or not. The man responds that he just got a little distracted. He says that for now, 2 places have come to his mind. Showing a map, he says that what he knows about Joring is about the business locations and their security. Because of his position in Joring, he's been going around making bribes in various regions. Surprised, the boy asks if it was him who was the street thug. But the man explains that it was more than just a street thug. Either way, he will tell him everything he knows with just one condition. Striking a pose, he asks to be taken to Taishan 2. Suspicious, the blonde asks if he didn't want to be part of Joring. Then the man responds that it's already time to change careers. In his mind, he understands that Taishan might really win and that, if everything goes well, he'll profit from it. With that condition, the blonde ends up accepting. As they leave, he tells the captain to follow him there. Confused, the man asks where exactly they need to go. Smiling, the boy says that if he didn't want to be part of Taishan, then they should go there together. This is the owner of Ganko Loans, Lee Jong-kai, who used to be part of Joring and now belongs to Taishan, at least temporarily. Meanwhile, in a possibly abandoned warehouse, someone enters it. A bald man is tied up, and another says this place is very empty. Ryu, walking up to the man, asks how things are going here. The man stays silent, so Ryu tells him not to stay quiet, that it's no fun for a prisoner to be so tough. He then comments that it looks like he feels lonely since he was separated from the old men. The prisoner responds that he shouldn't have locked him up in pairs. Sitting in the chair, Ryu says he's here to tell a funny story, so he should listen. He comments that Taishan is now subordinate to Ilhak, and that it's something about keeping Lee's traditions or something like that, and it seems they want the young master Yangmin as their president. Because of this, they are looking for them. Upon hearing this, the bald man begins to smile. Then Ryu congratulates them, saying that the young master became the president, meaning they raise him well. After hearing this, Lee asks if Jurang is going to fight against the combined forces of Taishin and Ilhak, and if he came all this way just to cry in fear, which isn't like him. Laughing a lot, Ryu asks what he's talking about, affirming that they are Jurang, and asks what an injured member of the Nine Knives and Taishin can do against them. Walking towards the man, he says that they might have Han-Shin from Taishin or Choi from Ilhak, and that they might even work together. However, on their side, they have professionals. The man questions the professionals and tells him not to make him laugh, saying that those professionals won't do any good, because Taishin has Bakdu Haiyan. Speaking of him, he's holding a knife, saying to ask something. If it's from the man, he asks who taught him to use a knife like that. After standing up, he realizes it's a mess, and he seems to have gone too far. He's holding the knife in his left hand. Adjusting his tie, he tells them to start again. The operation to rescue the Nine Knives has finally begun. Meanwhile, at the Taishin building, Jin welcomes the secretary and says he can take care of her luggage. He also mentions that the boss is waiting for her in the meeting room. She comments that she managed to understand most of the situation on her way to the location, and that there must be one of the Nine Knives at one of these places. Jin notes that she's already well informed about the job. The woman comments that he's flattering her and that it's just a simple task they entrusted to her. Then the man asks if there has been any progress. Hearing this, the girl pauses. She mentions that Director Ha himself said this, that there is no Taishin without Baek Du Hyeon. She then affirms that as the secretary of Taishin, she is simply fulfilling her duty and that he should do the same. That person, if they know what they should do, that it will be done. Upon arriving at the place, she apologizes for the wait and says she will start the meeting. A motel and an abandoned warehouse in Incheon. These are the two locations that were reported. These are the most likely places where Joring could have hidden the captured Nine Knives. Since they don't have numerical advantage, they can't attack both locations simultaneously. Therefore, they should focus their strength on one single location for now. Additionally, they need to leave some men defending the base in case of an enemy attack. Due to the low population around the motel in Taeyeon, it is likely that they will be discovered by the enemy. Thus, the logical decision to make would be to attack the abandoned warehouse instead of the motel. Bit comments that they won't mobilize their troops, and that if they are discovered and mobilize their troops, it will be at a disadvantage. Lee agrees with him. He says it's very dangerous to allow emotions to interfere with this. Beck mentions that he, Liu Shang, and Lin will go there to attack. He explains that they will send Liu Shang and Lin to the abandoned warehouse. Since they are good infiltration, they will be able to investigate the area without alerting Joring. Now regarding the other place, the motel. Sometime later at the motel, the protagonist is there reserving a room and says that he is looking for someone. The man responds that he can see he has his reasons, but he can't give information about other guests, especially someone unknown. The boy asks for just a quick look, pulling something out of his pocket, and the attendant says he heard him. The man thought money would come out, but suddenly he gets stabbed in the hand. Then the protagonist asks if he can speak now. Looking down at him, he says to let him ask a question. He asks if the Nine Knives are in this location. So on this mission, the protagonist decided to take care of the motel by himself. Pulling the knife out of the attendant's hand, he says to forget it, that there's no need to say anything else. In front of several people, he says he will ask them. Then, a while later, he managed to defeat them all with extreme ease. He thinks they are Jang's people and that it seems he hit the mark with C and came to the right place. However, even though he hasn't recovered from the previous blow, he asks if he really needed to come along. The old man comments that this is a job to rescue his companions and of course, he should come along. Smiling, the boy just asks him not to overdo it. The old man mainly thinks that they don't know who this Bak is. The hero says he doesn't want the president to be mad at him if the old man gets hurt. Sometime later, both start climbing the stairs. Breaking up the topic, the old man asks if he can ask something. The boy asks what he wants to know so suddenly and says he must be bored. Then Choi questions why Taishin appointed the young master as their president. Answering, Baek says it's obvious that it was to preserve Ilhak's traditions. At this, Choi says he didn't ask just to hear that pretentious answer. He explains that the government has started interfering in their business. Before this committee was disbanded and a war is about to happen. All of this that he mentioned happened in just 3 months. After hearing all of this, the hero asks what it has to do with what he wants to know. Then the old man calls the boy by his name and says that he believes he is somehow involved in these events. He then says he wants to know the real reason why Taishin is using them. The boy asks if he really wants to know that. The old man responds that he does and asks if they will agree to fight together. At that moment, several men come down the stairs saying they are down there. Pointing a knife, he tells him to stay still, calling him a bastard, and the protagonist says that they are very noisy and that the adults are talking. He comments that if they have something to say, they should come down here and say it then. At that moment, he grabs his enemy's ankle, throwing him hard onto the stairs. At this point, he calls the old man while another attacks him with a knife. Dodging the attack, the boy comments that they will have this conversation later. Then he throws the man directly to the old man to punch him. Koda lands a punch with full force, knocking the man to the ground. They are attacking one by one as they climb the stairs. Analyzing the situation, Choi thinks about an attack from above before and that normally an opponent attacking from a higher position has the advantage. Several people go after the two. Meanwhile, the old man thinks that this time their attacks are easier to read. Then the hero ends up attacking them all with extreme ease, cutting them down one by one with just his knife in his left hand. Observing the fight, the old man understands that a staircase like this can lose balance very easily. Looking at the old man, Baek comments that it seems they make a good team. One of the enemies tries to attack, but Baek manages to duck and prepares for a counterattack, landing a precise blow on the man who falls down the stairs, hitting his head hard on the ground. At this moment, the boy starts spinning the knife, and with a terrifying look, he prepares to finish off the opponent in front of him. Above everyone, he grabs their attention, asking if this is all, and comments that he's disappointed because he heard there were professionals in gearing, but all of them are being defeated by two gangsters. He comments that they are making it seem like he is, in fact, the professional in the situation. At the same time, at the abandoned warehouse, Jung Sang, the boy, asks if they have to check the entire area with just the three of them. Captain Gangcho says he didn't know he would have to come along and that he couldn't even say anything. Laughing, he says it's nothing and that they should keep moving, and Lim asks who this old man is. At this point, the captain says he mentioned there could be two locations, but he believes they are hiding here. Then the blonde says he should have said that from the beginning, explaining to the man that this is the place where Gyuring keeps their prisoners, and that the proposal only assumes it's here because he saw some new faces going to the hotel. This catches the blonde's attention regarding the mention of new faces, and the other responds that they weren't gangsters like him. He also comments that he heard there was a guy with a gun, and this information leaves him surprised. Meanwhile, back with the protagonist, he and the old man are slicing through everyone with extreme ease. Recalling when they met before about him being a monster and that he isn't someone on their level. Reflecting, he hears them say he's really strong, but seeing this scene, he didn't expect him to be this strong. One of the survivors starts running frantically. However, someone appears on the scene, kicking the guy with full force, and they realize it's the ninth of the knives, Lee Q-Cheng. The old man asks what's going on, and the man says he managed to escape during the commotion, and that the other 9 knives are in danger. He then runs, explaining that the path is this way. However, the protagonist notices something very strange and stops the old man from advancing, telling him to wait right there. The ninth of the knives starts yelling, telling them to hurry up right now. Then the protagonist approaches cautiously. Seeing the man ready to shoot, he asks what the meaning of this is. Quickly, the man reloads the gun, but before he can shoot, the protagonist appears in front of him with a knife. The man seems very tense about the situation, then recalls when someone asked if he had ever shot a person before. He responds, saying he fired a few times in the army. Then Bak gives up on finishing him. Smiling, he asks if he shouldn't kill him right now. Back at the abandoned warehouse in Yongsan, one of the 9 blades is tied to a chair. It's the 6th blade, Lee Sung-mong, who asks if it's already mealtime. He comments that he thought he would die of hunger. Lee enters and says there is no food and apologizes for that. The man is extremely confused about who he is. He approaches the place and breaks half of his cookie. He asks if that's enough for him. He comments that the bigger half is his. Perplexed, the man asks how the kid got in there and what happened to the guards. Moreover, he questions where he came from. The boy begins to answer that he came from the people's corpse, but stops there. He explains that he is from Taishan, which leaves the man completely bewildered. He questions if it was Taishan that moved and if it was the young master. He also asks if the others are okay. Lee, while untying the man, asks him to stop moving so much. He says they are sending people to rescue his friends, so he should calm down. Outside, everyone is already defeated by the child. The blonde comments that he must be around here. Looking at the warehouse, he finds another of the 9 blades tied up. He asks if he waited long and if he's okay. This is the 8th blade, Jang Diokbe. Approaching him, he says he just looked pitiful and asks the old man if he remembers him. He says he'll be upset if he doesn't remember. He comments that he remembers being attacked by the 8th blade indeed. Bringing his hand closer to his face, he asks him to pull himself together. Then he asks if he's feeling better now. At that moment, the old man has a hidden knife. Suddenly, he shouts and shows a terrifying expression, trying to hit the blonde with everything he's got on the head. However, he starts processing what is happening. Seeing the situation, Lee says it was as he thought. The man asks how he dodged that. In response, the boy says that even if he were sitting in the chair, his physique was much smaller than he remembered. Taking off the mask, the fake old man says that's not good reason, because not even Baek Yisu could dodge that move just now. Surprised, the blonde understands that it's not the old man. Taking the knife, he asks what happened and if he knows who Baek is. At that moment, the blonde charges forward and the two begin clashing their blades. Surprised, he comments that it was him who killed him. Then the maniac starts laughing. With a terrifying face, he says he killed him. Then he killed Baek. At the same time, someone approaches the abandoned warehouse. It's that hook captain, who says it's his moment to prove his worth. The moment in which he shows what he came for. After being discarded by the Joring, the man comments that this is Joring's property. If he's not one of ours, he should kindly leave. The man then tells him to lose his way right now. Getting ready to attack, he says his name is Lee from Hook Loans. Understanding the situation, the guard also prepares to attack. To avoid being beaten, he shows his badge and says he's also from During. After entering, he opens one of the warehouses and stammering asks if anyone is there. Looking around, the man tied up is called Dokuyan. This is the fourth blade. The old man introduces himself, saying he's the Hook from Hook Loans and that Taishan asked him to get the man out of there. Meanwhile, the battle continues between the maniac and the blonde. The white-haired one with his razor asks where he came from and how he knows Bak. He comments that he doesn't look like an old-school gangster, saying that in fact he seems to be a professional. The man begins to wonder who he could be. However, the blonde tells him to be careful with his tongue. Quickly, he tries to land a knife strike, but the man manages to dodge. Analyzing the situation, he thinks this guy aims straight for the throat without any hesitation. After that, Lee is already ready for another strike. Observing the fight, the white-haired man says it's not just that, but he's also fast and precise, just like a robot. Dodging with some ease, the man starts talking. He comments that the boy is full of openings and that, as he thought, he doesn't compare to Bak. A knife thrown in his direction manages to cut his cheek. Just barely, a man manages to dodge and then decides to back off. Perplexed and surprised, he thinks about the knife throw and wonders if he left an opening on purpose to make his real attack. Lee is surprised that he managed to dodge that and understands that he is indeed a professional. With his hand on his face, the man starts laughing loudly, saying it's fun. Smiling, he says he better not die so easily. At the same time, the protagonist is near the motel. Inside the car, the old man is with the ninth knife and he asks where the other knives are being kept. It responds that it's in an abandoned warehouse owned by During and that they must all be there. He says he has no intention of hurting them, but they shouldn't go. The old man then asks why, explaining the ninth knife says that they should be the ones to secure their safety. He questions if he can't see how they are now, that they can't win against During because times are changing. He comments that seeing this, he should hand over the young master of Taishan to During because it's the only way for the nine knives to survive. Before he can finish the sentence, the old man punches him directly in the cheek, causing him to fall to the side, leaning back slightly. Then he starts punching him more and more. After punching him repeatedly, he grabs him by the shirt. He tells him to keep talking so he can finish him off. Tearing up, the man begins to say that the island is no more. At that moment, the old man continues beating him, while the man outside keeps smoking. The ninth knife asks why they still insist on fighting a losing battle. With his hands trembling, the man listens in silence and shouts that it's precisely for that reason that he is absolutely wrong. At that moment, he throws a hard punch at the car window, narrowly avoiding hitting his companion's head. Placing his hand on his shoulders, he says that the nine knives have a reason to fight, and it's not to win, but to protect those they love. However, the subordinate grabs the man's wrist and asks how they can protect with such weak fists. At that moment, the protagonist enters the car. This catches his attention, and the boy steps on the accelerator. Surprised, the old man asks again what happened. The boy responds that things have gotten tight in the south. He says they need to go to the warehouse right now. Inside a warehouse, the two are still fighting. The white-haired one asks if he still wants to keep playing as things are about to get serious. Both are fighting head-on with their knives. The maniac manages to spot an opening, and the two clash. But the blonde manages to defend himself. They stare at each other, thinking about what to do next. Then the white-haired one starts spinning in one direction, and the blonde mirrors him, spinning counterclockwise. As they spin, the boy notices something. The white-haired one realizes that the blonde is reading his attacks. Moreover, he knows every move he's about to make, because he's using the same moves he is. Lee notices the wire and asks if people really still use that. In his mind, the maniac wonders if he even knows about his wires and his backup weapon, saying that, as he thought, he really does resemble him. Getting serious, he asks where he is from. Without responding, the boy charges at full speed. He tries to land a strike, but the man manages to dodge, and with his wires, he counterattacks. Analyzing, he thinks that this guy is like him and will know all his moves. And he knows them so well that he's already tired of them. At that moment, the blonde manages to use the wires themselves to trap the man. He then grabs one of his daggers and looks back. Rushing forward, the man can only land a significant strike on his torso. This surprises the white-haired man. However, his expression quickly changes, and he starts to smile. The two are locked in a violent clash. Lee charges with all of his might using one of the daggers. Reckless, the man grabs the blade with his hand, causing a significant cut on one hand while the other falls to the ground. But quickly, the white-haired man counters and grabs both daggers. He then starts smiling. Getting very excited with a frightening and manic expression, he tells them to do it again. Meanwhile, in another abandoned warehouse, the sixth knife tells Hung Lim to be more discreet, because he might end up alerting the enemy. Looking to the side, he notices something strange and calls his bald friend. He realizes that their comrade, the redhead, is lying on the ground. Going over to the redhead, the bald man starts shaking him, asking him to wake up. But everything indicates that the man is unconscious. Very irritated, the bald man begins shouting his friend's name. Then he realizes that, in fact, he was just sleeping. Looking back, he asks if there's really a need to be discreet, and his colleague tells him to just wake him up already. The bald man starts waking him up and mentions that all that's left is for Taishan to rescue Gyokba now. Stuttering, Captain Ganko enters, asking permission from the Lords of the Knives, and says there's a problem. Carrying one of them, he says this guy isn't cooperating properly. It turns out to be that old man from before who was not the real old man, but the maniac. They realize that this is actually Diokba. He even says that he already talked to the boss and that he needs to get out of here now. Then the headlights of a car start shining intensely. The light ends up blinding the kid. As they approach, a man says he had a feeling, but you never thought they would sneak around here. It's Ryu staring at them along with all his subordinates. Holding his juice in English, he says they came here like a bunch of rats. Meanwhile, the fight between the blonde and the maniac continues. Smiling, the maniac says that this is fun for him. He has a dagger stuck in the blonde's shoulder. Suddenly, there's a flashback to 5 years ago. A man is lying on the ground, apparently dead. Meanwhile, Ryu begins attacking another. At that moment, someone arrives with a knife, cursing and charging at him. But with great skill, Ryu manages to grab the man's knife. He then prepares to land a direct punch, striking him right in the throat. He then finishes him off with cold precision. The boy approaches the main room. Sitting in the chair, the man says he didn't have to do that they were men who could have simply talked. He asks who sent him, whether it was the North or the South. This is Yang Jongpao, a smuggler of military goods and an agent from North Korea. His codename is Two Arms, and he is wanted for espionage by both the South and the North. The man holding a gun asks if they can just make a deal, and that, no matter which side he came from, he's sure there's something that might capture his interest. He then ends up pointing the gun directly at the boy. However, a razor wire approaches him. Quickly, he manages to cut the man's arm. The smuggler is completely shocked, not understanding what happened. He calls the boy crazy. The boy then calls him Two Arms, makes a joke, and says that if it's a warning, they'll focus on just one pie instead of sticking their finger in everyone's pie. He comments that it's a pity he can't be called Two Arms anymore for obvious reasons. This is Liu Sun from the Hidden Special Forces, a new task force of the Phantom Squad. He has eliminated 11 targets. Sometime later, the boy leaves that house. Someone on the phone asks about Two Arms. The boy replies that he changed his shelter to just one arm. On the other end of the line, the person asks if he left him alive. But Sun questions if he should have done anything differently. The one on the phone is Shang, who calls him Kid. Adjusting his tie, he says he's telling him that they can't leave loose ends. Sun comments that this was told to him, that the objective was just to give a warning, so he asks if he really has to kill him. The lieutenant says that's just what they put in the mission document, but wouldn't it be better to play it safe? The boy then starts questioning what playing it safe means. The man says he understands his point of view, but this is a mission, and it's not some desperate order from the head of the Phantom Squad. He says that even if the people above don't know who the Phantom Squad is, the boy sees everyone and should soon understand the importance of his role. Walking up to the gate, the boy says he does understand. Shang continues by saying that next time he is not to leave loose ends. The blonde responds affirmatively. Returning to the present, he asks the maniac if he thinks this is funny. He then prepares to kick, striking the man's supporting foot with full force. At that moment, he notices something happening. Xiang rushes forward with his knife. However, he ends up missing and strikes Xiang instead. In the quick movement, he begins to change his trajectory. He prepares to land a sharp blow on his opponent, but the white-haired man manages to barely defend himself. Wasting no time, Xiang changes his movement and grabs the maniac's leg. With a terrifying look, he's holding two knives, one of them bloodied. The white-haired man quickly backs away. In his mind, he thinks that if he had hesitated for just another second, he would have lost his leg. He wonders who this damn kid is. Suddenly, from the other side of the line, someone tells Xiang that they are in trouble and that he needs to move quickly. In his mind, the boy thinks that if he were discovered, he should have known it wouldn't be that easy. He tells the maniac that it's a pity, but that's it for today. He bids farewell, saying they'll settle this another time. As he walks away, the white-haired man asks where he thinks he's going, but he's limping as his skin is covered in blood. He yells at the boy not to dare leave and curses at him. Elsewhere, Hugh says he was expecting a full attack from them, but he questions what he gains from being just a damn kid. He then looks at Captain Gankado and asks who he is. Crying for not being recognized, the man asks if he's serious that he really doesn't know and says maybe it's better that way. Hugh says enough with the games and asks if they know they won't leave here alive. Hearing this, Lee gets ready to defend himself. Quickly, a wire wraps around the man. Behind him, Lee appears, calling him a parrot. He tells him to stay perfectly still. However, the man begins to react. Lee dodges and lands safely, tightening the rope more and more around his opponent. Suddenly, he pulls the rope around the man's neck. With some force, he easily immobilizes him by the neck, saying that as always, his fists come first, and that this is his bad habit and he's about to kill him. The man begins to choke, unable to breathe. Struggling with the rope around his neck, the man screams, asking what this is. The blonde comments that he can consider himself unlucky because today he's in a bad mood. Nevertheless, the leader really tries to fight back, but quickly the boy dodges and asks what that was. Then he kicks his joints. Holding the wires tightly, he comments that he's quite a restless person. In the background, the subordinates curse him. Lee comments that now is not the time for any of them to move a muscle, because if they do, he might end up killing their boss. Then Lee calls for the parrot, asking him to get the girls out of there. In his mind, the man tries to believe the unbelievable because Ryu was judged so easily that the senator, where he's already full, arranged a subordinate like him. Strangling the man, Lee comments that people tend to say things like this in situations like these. Then he shouts for them to open the way or he'll open up their boss like a pig. Suddenly, a person with glasses appears behind him. The blonde immediately notices the movement, letting go of Ryu for a moment to dodge the attack. It's Chang, who says he talks too much and is pretending to be someone he's not. Recognizing who it is, the boy is surprised. He tries to strike with full force, but the lieutenant says that was very predictable. He then lands a knee right in his gut, making him drop to his knees. Smiling, the man apologizes and asks if it was him who got shot. He comments that it would be a pleasure to hear it again. He remarks that if he's still alive, many things make sense now. Changing his expression, he approaches and asks if the leader of Taishan is by and that this. Then he stabs a knife into his hand. He looks at everyone and steps back, telling them not to move. He explains that this is how you use hostages. Scared, he comments that he can't just threaten their lives. He has to put on a show too. Holding his neck, Ryu is visibly irritated. Chang says he told him before that he shouldn't be so weak, and that furthermore, he shouldn't leave any loose ends. Ryu moves toward the blonde and kicks him in the head, questioning what they're mumbling about. After the kick, he follows up with a punch using his brass knuckles, hitting the boy with full force. Grabbing him by the shirt, the one he estimates is the same shirt from before. Seeing this behavior, Chang isn't pleased. The man keeps trying to strike while the boy blocks, and he tells him to keep talking nonsense like before. Preparing for another strike, he tells him to keep pushing his luck. However, Lee manages to dodge the blow. Quickly, he pushes his enemy, forcing him down with a pipe and pressing hard on his neck. He begins to enter a state of desperation. With the dagger close to his face, Chang turns and says that the flame you still haven't understood. Then he makes a direct cut on his eye. Holding it in his hand, he comments that he put on a show, just like the eye said. He says that if it's already sold, he can get out of his way or he will really kill him this time. With great coldness, the lieutenant says that he can kill him because they don't need that damn useless man anyway. Looking back, he asks what they are doing and tells them to hurry up. In the background, Lee comments that by the looks of it, they don't want to, because it seems like he doesn't know gangsters very well. He explains that this is something he heard before, but it seems to be true. It seems that the world of gangsters is different from soldiers like them, because you don't become the boss just because you're strong. The one they believe in becomes the real boss. Smiling, he says that if he's going to fight with them or with the gangsters, he can't leave any loose ends, because the rules on this side of the fence are very different. Irritated, Jean questions about rules and asks if he thinks that a logic born from emotions can be considered a rule. He comments that that's exactly why those damn gangsters make everything a mess. In his mind, he thinks that even if Ryu loses his life here, they will lose control over the Gyurink. He is surprised because he realizes that a bunch of brutes would end up being loyal to their owner. At that moment, he calls for Liaxian, telling him to let him go, that he'll play by his rules just this once. Moreover, he also calls for President Ryu. The negotiator says that they'll talk later. The blonde man responds that they will let Ryu go as soon as they ensure his safety and asks them not to follow. The man tries to break free from the hold. The thug tries to break free from the hold, but Lai tells him not to feel so down because he'll take his real gold next time. Bringing the dagger closer, he tells him not to try dying before that. Ryu realizes he's been released and tries to hit him. However, he notices he's completely alone and remains silent. Because of all this humiliation, he starts to get very angry. He yells that Taishan are just damn useless insects. He claims that he will finish them off along with the professionals and the rest. At that moment, Jang approaches the man. He comments that by the looks of it, they need to clear some things up. Smiling, Ryu says that he arrived just in time and that he was thinking of doing the same. Very coldly, the man simply adjusts his glasses with a knife.